everyone. I'm Sky, for those of you who haven't met me, because I see a couple of new faces. Most everyone I know, but there's a couple I don't. Welcome. We meet here every Tuesday night. We have a different topic every week, and then we kind of recycle every year to go into different depths as to what we're exploring. And tonight we're talking about the 7 planes of existence. Come on through, sweetie.
Thank you.
How they relate to our spiritual enlightenment, the different things that we're mastering on the different levels in order to be able to kind of become whole and complete. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to say before we even start tonight is that it's not like there's a hierarchy of levels. Okay? It's not like the first level is less important or lower vibrational than the higher level. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? They're all working together as a whole, the same way your body's working together as a whole. The same way the planet has all the different levels, so everything's in the same space. Like, you know, Creator isn't up there in the clouds somewhere, it's inside your heart and every single cell and every single atom that's inside this room. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, so that's not what this is about. It's just about acknowledging all the different levels to our wholeness, which are separated by frequency, by lessons, by the different vibrational states, by the different laws of the universe. Learning how to work with those in depth, clearing up some stuff around them, and I'll explain more as we go along. Okay, so this is me. I'm a director here at Pandora Spa, and I'm an author, and I'm a advanced theta practitioner and healer. So I have a clinic here on Mondays and Thursdays, which I do one-to-one healings in and do Skype sessions on as well. So if you guys want to contact me, you can find me on any of these numbers. I'll put it back up at the end. You can also go onto my website, which is just my name, and there's a bunch of old talks on there completely for free. So if you click on the videos page, you can find a ton of like 2-hour-long talks that Wiggs back there has thankfully filmed for us, because I'm really not a technique kind of person. And yeah, there's also like a booking page on there as well, so you can see where other people have booked in and where you can go in, which saves me 6 messages every time I want to book a session with someone. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be teaching in 2 different modalities, and this is how I always teach, okay? So I teach from the principles of A Course in Miracles, and I teach from Theta Healing. So Theta Healing is a technique developed by Vianna Stabile. It uses the theta brainwave state to access the subconscious mind, and through it the different planes of existence, and channel healing from those different planes. Okay? So theta healings include belief work, feeling work, body scanning, readings, past life stuff, ancestral healing, and downloads, which I'll be teaching you guys about tonight. And you'll see me, not in the first section of the talk, I'm going to take you through the information-y bit, but in the second bit I just do channeling for you guys and do healing. So you'll see how it works and how it all comes together. A Course in Miracles is a complete self-study spiritual thought program. So it consists of 3 books. A text, which is like a big 700-page thing. A workbook for students, which is 365 meditations with lessons, 1 for every single day of the year. Okay, I've been doing it for 5 years now, every day of every year. It's not something that you just do and then it's done. Every time you do it, it gets deeper. The lessons go deeper. There's different layers. But it's a spiritual training, basically, designed to release, untrain your mind from thoughts of fear and retrain it to thoughts of love. And then there's a manual for teachers. So once you've been doing the course for 2 or 3 years, they say you're ready to move on for the manual for teachers. And it talks about teaching being a demonstration of love, of peace, of forgiveness, versus it being an exchange of information. And it's based on the principles of equality and unity versus on the principle of I know more than you and therefore I've got something to give. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? So it's advanced metaphysical principles. You can go online and get the course completely for free, the lessons, the workbook. If you want to download it on your Kindle, it's £7. The big text is about £30, but it's the Foundation for Inner Peace, which is the person that makes it, it's a big book. So basically they're not making a profit off of it, if that makes any kind of sense. It's a really big book. And it is a complete program. So that in and of itself, A Course in Miracles is enough to completely change a life. You mix it with theta healing and you're going to go fast. Because theta healing allows you to access things deep, fast, and figure out where things are going. So I work with both, and you'll see me applying principles from the Course in Miracles, and that's one of the most important things, how to apply the principles. Because spiritual principles are no use if they're up in the intellectual ether somewhere. Okay, and we're going to talk about that when it comes to the 6th plane of existence. We're going to talk about brain candy, and on the 4th plane of existence we're going to talk about emotional candy, otherwise known as drama, right? So this tends to happen when your past lives start coming up, or when there's a romantic drama in your life where you recreate something over and over again, and there's so much depth to it, you could live there forever. You could just camp out on that particular plane of existence and stay there for a few lifetimes. So we're going to be talking about that. And the difference between honoring an emotion, holding an emotion, and dwelling in an emotion, and how to find the balance between the two. Hello, come on in, have a seat. Don't feel weird. There's plenty of cake as well. There's tea in the kitchen. Sorry? Oh, music. Sorry. I'm totally in.
Sorry, got any change?
Me, probably. Considering, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. Right. We'll keep going. Okay, so you'll see me using both of these. Okay, so in every plane of existence, there are different levels of belief. Okay, so this applies to whatever level you're working on and however long you're working there. So in Theta Healing, they talk about 4 levels of belief. I believe there are 7, but we can go into that, a different topic for a different night, on more advanced belief systems and changing belief works. But this is the basics, okay? So in Theta Healing, there's the core level of belief, which is all held in your prefrontal cortex of the brain. So if you were to do an energy scan on somebody, hello darling, if you were to do an energy scan on somebody, then you'd see most of their childhood beliefs from 0 to 7 years of age in this lifetime are held in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, right? Predominantly, this part of the brain is actually not developed when you're a baby, because your brain wouldn't be able to come out of your mum's hips if it was that big. So most of it grows in during your childhood, okay? Our ability to reason, our ability to feel higher level emotions like patience, grace, love, compassion, all of it are developed through the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and that's the core level. The genetic level, basically programs carried over from your ancestors in your DNA, in your genetics, from 800 years. Okay, so this is your beliefs about, you get all sorts of things on the gene level. Famine, plague, war, poverty, nationalism, race, gender, all this stuff is held on the genetic level. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. Yeah? The history level is on this part of your aura over here. It's like on the periphery, and it makes sense, right? It's like the membrane through which you come into contact with the rest of the world. So basically that carries all your memories from past lives, from the collective unconsciousness. So you're going to find things like Carl Jung talked about, archetypes. You're also going to find advertising from the media. Sometimes I'm walking down the street and I can see adverts going around and around and around people's auras. Things that they're being bombarded by from the collective consciousness sit around that area. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah. Also, it's why we tend to unconsciously know how to respond. It's kind of like that conditioning, when in Rome, do like the Romans. Mm-hmm. It's also a biggest reason of jet lag possible. If I fly from here to Chicago, suddenly that level of my aura is downloaded with all the information from Chicago, the information from the earth, the collective consciousness of Chicago, the time, the space from there. And it's a lot heavier because I'm carrying double. Does that make sense? I'm carrying the information from Britain and I'm carrying the information from Chicago. And I haven't let go of the information from Britain yet. So there's a conflict on the history level. Does that make sense? Yeah? The soul level. So our gifts, children that are just born able to paint, able to play the piano, able to speak other languages, who have memories of their other lifetimes, are carried on the soul level, life between life. It's the cells at the bottom of the heart. It's often why Native Americans will refuse to get transplants, organ transplants, because the organs carry memories, and unless those memories are cleared, often you'll start having experiences that are similar to the donor. Does that make sense? Yeah? So the same thing with the ancestral genetic programming. It's a symbiotic relationship. It's why the more similar your body is to the person that you receive the donation from, the less likely your body is to reject the organ, even if you have similar blood type. Because on a DNA level, on a genetic level, there might be classes culturally, genetically, physically, spiritually. Does that make sense? Even gender-wise, that mostly, even people on a spiritual level don't know they have to resolve. So consciously, you might be telling yourself, well, I've changed my beliefs around that, but all you've done is access the core level, the prefrontal cortex. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And that also explains why so much of the healing that we do around belief work doesn't work as deeply as we would like it to, because we remove the belief from one level but not 4 levels. okay? And when I work, I remove them from 7 levels, sometimes 8 levels, but this is enough to create huge changes very, very quickly, okay? When we're doing downloads tonight, and this is the reason I teach this every single time I give a talk, is because I get a deeper level of consent from you guys. Okay? Because if you know what I'm energetically doing, you're not going to be sitting there on a spiritual level going, why the hell is she in my jeans? Does that make sense? Yeah? I'm asking for consent to change and access your genes or your DNA or different parts of your aura, and if you feel that happening, obviously any downloads that I give you, you can say yes or no to. I don't force anything on anybody. But if I'm just saying to you, I'm changing your beliefs, but actually I'm doing it on different levels than you're used to, I can freak people out. Does that make sense? Yeah? I've also had people leave here and say to me, the next morning I get phone calls going, I can't get out of bed. Right? I feel like I'm completely like stiff, and I'm like, okay, you're having a bit of a healing crisis, and we resolve the stuff that's coming up. And they're like, I've been to loads of stuff, I've never had so much stuff come up and resolve at the same time. And then suddenly they're like, boom, they're like fireworks, they're gone, they're sorted, the issues are but sometimes so much stuff comes up because for the first time in their lives they've had the opportunity to work on all those levels at the same time. And their DNA is like, oh, finally I get to have an upgrade. Does that make sense? Yeah. Particularly on the ancestral level, on the family level, so much stuff gets resolved, and so much stuff has been waiting to get resolved, and people are so confused about how the hell that stuff is happening that when they get an opportunity, they're like, I'm in. And normally they're the fast ones, the people that just have instant awakenings, and they kind of just pop. But if that happens, just know that that's what's happening. And normally it's because they also have beliefs around they need to suffer in order to learn. They need to suffer in order to grow spiritually. So they manifest an illness or a bit of body paralysis as a healing crisis so they can justify taking that leap in growth. Does that make sense? And that's normally all I have to do to get them back on their feet in less than 5 minutes, okay? But that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be putting beliefs on all 4 levels, removing beliefs on all 4 levels from all the different planes of existence. Okay, so some of the descriptions on the slides tonight are very general. Most of the information I'm going to be talking about is going to be verbal, okay, and through personal experience. Feel free to ask questions. If it starts getting too much, I'll get you to ask them at the end during the channeling, because otherwise the talk goes on forever and some people have to leave on time, okay? Okay, so the first level of existence is the mineral and crystal kingdoms. The first kingdom of existence contains minerals, crystals, all the organic matter that makes up the planet. From the sand at the bottom of the ocean to Mount Everest, the whole of the periodic table is the first kingdom of existence. Okay? People that heal through the first kingdom of existence are called alchemists. Okay? They're able to transform things like Jesus, water into wine, and bronze into gold. It's an idea of transforming one thing into another thing. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? Now, what I said to you at the beginning still stands. Every single level of consciousness can heal. So minerals come from non-organic matter. Things like if you're anemic and you need more iron. Things like if you're struggling with zinc and you can't detox the body the way it needs to. Things like clay that if you take will bind to heavy metals in your body and release the heavy metals from your body from like up to 8 generations backwards. Can you see how minerals can be incredibly healing and powerful? Yeah. Whenever you're working that way, whether it's through and when you're eating healthily, especially, and I'll get to that in a minute, like with plants. Plants take minerals, combine them with raw organic matter to make vitamins. Okay, and then the body absorbs vitamins and uses it to heal itself. Plants are incredibly intelligent, and we'll go into that in a minute. But from the mineral level of existence, that's the first way in which minerals heal, is that they are in charge of the building and the regulating of our lives and all of its functions. Not just spiritually speaking, but physiologically speaking. If you have trouble building and regulating your life, if you have trouble organizing yourself, if you have trouble receiving emotional and physical support, normally you're low on minerals. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's counterintuitive, but that's one of the biggest reasons why people say if you're depressed and you take vitamin D, suddenly you're happy. Right? Because on a spiritual level, what it's doing is it's downloading, programming your body on a mineral level about how to create structure, regulation in the highest and best way. It's restoring divine order to your body on a molecular level. You're working with the mineral kingdoms to remember what that feels like. Okay? If a body lacks minerals, there will be a lack of emotional support and structure in our life. Okay? People who struggle with the first kingdom struggle to absorb minerals and vitamins from the soil and have a weak connection with the earth, feeling like they don't belong here. This is why Reiki is such a powerful healing. modality, okay? Because a lot of people, when they experience trauma on the planet, be it through illness, be it through war, be it through abuse of some kind, it causes a break. In Portuguese and in Spanish, they call it susto, which means a fright, like soul fright. Here they call it soul loss in English language. But there's a part of us that leaves the planet, doesn't want to be on the planet anymore. Does that make sense? Yeah. When that happens, when we don't want to receive any energy from the planet because we think it's not safe, the body loses its ability to absorb minerals from food, from the surrounding environment, right? There's also, very sadly, when we abuse the planet, which is what a lot of what's happening right now, when we don't cultivate the soil, when we don't, last year I was in France with my husband, helping him run the Astral projection workshop, and I was teaching channeling there. And one of the men who was the wife of a lady who came, and she wasn't well, and he came up to me afterwards, and he was only peeking into the sessions, and he said, look, I'm not really one for sitting in on spiritual lessons, but I'll give anything if you come and speak to the trees for me. And I was like, excuse me? And he was like, I'm a gardener, and they have an orchard back there, and there's something wrong with the trees, and I need to know what's wrong with the trees. And I was like, talk about putting me on the spot, right? So I was like, okay, I will come and speak to your trees for you. And it was really beautiful for me, because I normally only speak to one tree at a time, but this time it was like I had a whole orchard. And it was really organized in a hierarchy, like which was the king tree and which was the queen tree, not something I even thought trees would have. Because trees aren't organized by competition, but by life force energy, and they support themselves through the roots and all sorts. And I said to the king, you know, what is going on? And he explained to me that the soil was weak, that it didn't have enough minerals. And I said to him, well, you know, how would you like me to resolve it? And I'm not a gardener. Okay, I kill plants. All you have to do is look around at those plants in the back corner. I'm really sorry. I will remember to water you. This is the problem. As I'm talking, they're talking to me. I was speaking to him, and he said, you know, there's these plants. And he showed me these big, broad-rimmed plants, and he said they're weeds, but they put minerals back into the earth. He said in 5 years, they will have remineralized the earth. He was like, this stuff that they keep adding, and he showed me like compost type soil things. He was explaining that the minerals in the earth were too big, and that though they were there, he couldn't absorb them, right? So, and that the plants, the weeds would make the minerals small enough so that he could reabsorb the energy. So do you see how useful it is being able to talk to the different planes, not just for gardens, but actually for why the hell stuff isn't working, right? If you can tap into the first plane of existence, you can tell whether or not a baby's milk formula has the minerals a baby needs, whether a vegetable has what it needs. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps all over me now. So it's really, really useful. So healers who exclusively work with the first plane of existence are called alchemists. Crystal healers are also working with the first plane of existence. Crystals are the record keepers of the earth. Okay, they're also incredibly diverse. They are, and this is one of the main lessons that you learn on the planet, is you're releasing the beliefs that non-organic matter is dead. Okay? The first plane of existence reminds you that you're more than a physical body, and that life is more than 3D, right? That every rock has a name, has a spirit, has a soul, the same way you do. It reminds you that you're not your physical body, and that birth was not the beginning and death was not the end. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Crystals are insane with the amount of healing that they're able to do. They hold memories. The same way that our genes hold the memories. Oh, that's an interesting channeling. The same way that our genes hold the memories of our ancestors, the crystals hold the memories of the earth. Okay, so we've got 800 years, which is nothing in the life of a planet. They've got hundreds of thousands of millions of years held inside their data. So when you hold the crystals of the planet, you're holding the genes of the earth. And when you do healing work with the crystals, you're doing healing work on the genetics of the DNA, and you're healing the planet too. Does that make sense? Yeah? And the same way they're now discovering that genes are not static, that DNA is not static, that's affected by emotions, by thoughts, by feelings, by environment, so are crystals not static. We just don't have the science to be able to show how they change and respond. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So when you're working with crystals, just be aware that they have a name, they have a soul, they have a purpose. Okay? Also with the first plane of existence, you're still dealing with an exchange of energy, with the exception of some very exceptional crystals, angelic crystals, aura quartz, citrine crystals, black organite that can ground and clear themselves and have a very strong connection back to Creator. There are other crystals that you can do damage to if you don't work with them in the correct way. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I'll tell you a story from my life. I had this beautiful crystal that was given to me around the time when I first woke up. It was this beautiful, really powerful rainbow quartz crystal, and I wore it around my neck. And I used it to do DNA healings and exorcisms on people. Now this one time I had a friend, and I was about 19 years old, and she called me, and she was a journalist, and she said, I've got a problem. I was doing a healing on a client, and I've picked up something, and it's too big for me to deal with, and I don't know how to deal with it. Can you please come round and clear it for me? So I came around with my salt and my crystal, right? Mineral Kingdom salt, and my crystals. And I was like, okay, I'm going to, release whatever energy you're holding on that level. And I could feel the crystal start to pull out the energy that was there, which is 4th plane, 5th plane level of existence, and we'll get to that in a minute. And it started growing darker and darker and darker, and then it went completely clear, completely white. You know how sometimes before someone passes away, they glow? Like you can see almost like they're angels surrounding them. That crystal just started to glow and glow and glow and glow. But the moment I stepped out of that house and she was completely cleared of her attachment, it broke into my hands. Like it was wearing here, just literally collapsed. I remember catching it and it was like dust, right? So I was absolutely heartbroken. I remember calling Todd in tears and being like, I broke my crystal. And it was its time to pass away, but I didn't have the knowledge to work with crystals on that level at that time. Does that make sense? Yeah? There are crystals that are more appropriate for working with different energies at different times and different spaces. And crystals that are good for working with lower 4th plane energies, astral energies with. Amethyst would probably have been a much better choice. But I wasn't thinking in that way, and it served me for a very long time. Does that resonate with everyone? So sometimes crystals will do that. Crystals will die. Right? And they won't die the way humans die, but they die when they've learned everything they can learn from the first level of existence, and they're ready to transcend. They become the minerals. Guess what? The minerals are absorbed by the plants, and they go up into the 2nd plane of existence. Does that make sense? Yeah? They become parts of the seeds. They become parts of the creation, so that when they grow, when that next generation of plants grow, that same crystal will have the experience of being a being that experiences emotions for the first time through that sense. Does that resonate with everyone? Yeah? Crystals will also absorb emotions, thoughts, feelings, just like little children do, right? They are very protective and very indiscriminate, so clean them often. Okay? They love sunshine, they love the sea. Obviously there's a few exceptions. You don't want to be putting some crystals underwater if they're going to dissolve. So read about self-care, but you want to have like a little pot of salt and a little pot of water, depending on what crystals you're working with during what sessions. There's a really good book called The Crystal Keys by a healer called Shabdan, that it has light language tools for working with crystals, activating crystals, reconnecting them with their core self. It's a very, very powerful book. It made my crystals out of this world healers before they knew what I was doing, before I knew what I was doing, because they were connected back to their core of life. Does that make sense what the first plane of existence is about? Yeah? So if you want to work with the first plane of existence, you're going to have beliefs come up about not being human, about not being a physical being, about not wanting to be on this planet. The traumas you've experienced in past lives are going to come up because it's not safe to be on this planet because I died here. Does that make sense? Yeah? So when you start working with crystals, a lot of past life stuff come up. Akashic records come up. Accessing, the whole of the memory of the planets comes up, and not just the memory of humans. So a lot of people get sucked into 6th plane energy of numerology, planets, astrology, advanced sacred geometric shapes and mathematics, because they're being pulled into this deep subconscious memory of the universe, not just of the earth, when they're working with the mineral kingdoms. Yeah, so all the kingdoms are a portal into all the others, and we'll go. You can already see how the plant and mineral kingdoms work together, but it'll get more advanced as we go. Okay. So the plant kingdoms. So these consist of the nature spirits. So you're talking fairies, fire salamanders, nymphs, lymphs, and overlighting divas, which are the spirits of the trees, and many, many more. These are only 4. There are many, many more. In Scotland, we have brownies, which are the house fairies. And because they work with, bless, and help fertilize and distribute the spirits of the plants. So when you start working with the plant kingdoms, most people will experience a very mischievous energy. They'll experience elementals very, very quickly. And this is actually coming here. So you'll also tap into things like ayahuasca, DMT, magic mushrooms, weed. Elementals have a very playful, mischievous energy. Be aware that all plant energies and elemental energies is a swap of energy. So this is why a lot of original healers thought that they had to give something in order to receive something. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's why if I go off into the Amazon rainforest and I do ayahuasca, I'm going to come out thinking I have to save the planet, right? Because ayahuasca is like, okay, I will give you this healing, right, in exchange for you stopping them cutting down the rainforest and healing the planet. Now, I'm not saying we don't have to do that, but it's from a different place. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? There's a different place of, if you heal it's the same place trying to heal a person from a place of thinking that they're broken. You can't heal a person by focusing on their brokenness. You can only heal a person by focusing on their light, on the love within them, right? You have to be aware of the darkness and you have to be honest about the darkness, but the darkness is not what heals, the light is what heals. So, you know, the only antidote to hatred is love. The only antidote to jealousy is abundance. You need the opposite. Does that make sense? Mm. Yeah, so you need to be able to recognize what's there, but you can't dwell on it because that's not the remedy, it's not the solution, it's not the cure. So all of the drugs and stuff are incredibly, incredibly powerful. Plants are like humans. They're influenced by the energy that raises them. Mm. Okay? So and this is why sometimes you walk into gardens and you can genuinely feel the amazing energy of the plants because the person who grew them loved them. Right, loved them from the moment they were born. This is why the best shamans in the rainforest grow their own plants and they talk to their own plants every day and they program them with what they want them to do because they're having this in-depth conversation. Does that make sense? And they recognize the intelligence of the plants. It's also why you can do one round of this stuff and it be amazing and the next round doesn't have a kick. Okay? Because it's not just the plant you're experiencing, it's the amount of love it experienced as it was being raised, as it was developing, as it was growing. And like us, plants have genes, they have genetics, they have DNA. So they're carrying the memory of all of their ancestors, of all the different experiences. So many plants have experienced trauma. Okay? There's been a lot of abuse with cocaine, with weed, with now what's going on with ayahuasca, with DMT, because Westerners have a gift for taking something sacred and making it trendy without carrying the sacredness with it. Does that make sense? Yeah? They want in 5 minutes what used to take 50 years or 500 years. So it's not that there's anything wrong with the plants, but this is what I mean by it's important to talk to the plants. It's important to have a connection with them. It's important to make agreements with them. And this is why in Theta Healing, we work with every plane through the 7th plane. Because if I'm working through the energy of Creator of all that is under the law of grace, I can work with ayahuasca, for example, and I've had many friends who've done ayahuasca, and I'm Brazilian. My grandmother was a shaman in the rainforest. And you don't just tap into, there's more than one way to make an exchange equal. And you can heal the rainforest and heal the planet through actions, through deeds, through words, through commitments in your own life, and through energy. Does that make sense? Mm. Yeah? So it's about having a conversation, not just about what the plant can do for you, but what you can do for the plant. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And like Einstein says, you can't solve the problem from the level at which it was created. So if you join in the drama that the plant is having, if you think that the world is over and that humans are bad and there's this war between good and evil and that you have to defend the planet, you can't put out a fire by adding more fire. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you have to release the trauma that the plant is carrying. You have to release the trauma that you're carrying. You have to really look at the abuse that's gone on with the nature kingdoms and what humans have been doing. And you have to change the way, not just that you think, but the way that plant thinks and connects with human beings. Does that make sense? And you can download plants the way you download human beings. You can teach it the difference between what it feels and what's Creator's truth. You can teach it, because most plants have only been exposed to a very small number of humans because they don't have the mobility that humans have, right? They tend to be grounded in one place. So you can show them what the whole of humanity is and what it looks like. For plants that are terrified of people, I like to show them amazing gardeners, particularly in Germany. Germans have a gift with plants. And there's amazing, amazing places, particularly when plants are traveling. They normally get very scared, very disheartened. They don't have any idea what's going on. Okay, so when I'm traveling with plants or someone's bringing plants to me, I normally tune in and tell them, this is what's happening, this is where you're going, this is what the soil's like where we're going, this is how you're going to get food, this is how you're going to get sunlight, this is what this is doing, because it calms them down. The plants are like humans, stress kills. Does that make sense? So I'm constantly putting them in the back of lorries and ferrying them around, and I'm not talking to them, I'm not explaining what's happening. The stress of that will cause more damage than actually moving them from A to B. Does that make sense? Yeah, and you're not just talking the stress the plant actually feels from being removed from its family, from its garden, from its environment, but it has a connection with all of the microbes in the earth, with all of the different beings that lived in it and fed off it, and it's not going to see any of those again. So you're dealing with grief as well. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm sorry if this is a bit woo-woo for you guys, but this is kind of where it goes when you go in this direction. Okay, so plants are incredibly, incredibly, incredibly powerful. Most of the drugs in the pharmaceutical industry come from distilled plants. Okay, almost every single kind of healing that's done through the medical profession is through plants. Plants can be used to heal and they can be used to kill. Okay, please, please, please work with them gently, work with them wisely. Okay, plants also don't have the same level of emotional understanding as humans do, and I'm not talking about trees, okay? I'm talking about things like drugs in particular. So if you're really, really low and you're really depressed and you turn around to heroin and say, I don't want to live anymore, you're not going to come out of that high. Does that make sense? Yeah? You don't mean to, but it's picking up on that vibration and it will give you what you want, because it doesn't have a human legal system where you're not allowed to kill people. Does that make sense? It's like if it can offer you an exchange, it will. Okay, same things with things like and when you're working with plants, you're working with entity and literally an energy of a human being. So when I'm working with people who are addicted to different drugs or to different plants, and often it doesn't even matter if it's just drugs, it's things like sugar, things like alcohol, all of those are also plants, right? It's in the name of alcohol. Alcohol is also known as spirits. Okay. And drugs are a very similar thing. So you will actually, when you start to open your third eye, you'll actually see, for example, if someone's addicted to weed, you'll see the energy of her wrapped, that's a female, wrapped around the body of the person. Does that make sense? Yeah? And normally she's quite tight around the area where they're carrying the most trauma, because the reason they're using her is to keep it down. Does that make sense? They're using her strength to suppress or repress the trauma. And normally she won't move until she knows that that person is in safe hands. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? It can also be used at a much higher vibration to heal things like cancer, but that's a different agreement. Okay? It's like a different level of relationship. So let's say I'm in relationship with my best friend. I can be in relationship with my best friend on the level of, please hear everything I have to say, but don't ever really help me. Does that make sense? Or I can be in a relationship with the same best friend at the level of, tell me everything that's in your heart and I'll tell you everything that's in my heart and we'll figure something out. Right? So same person, different relationship. Same plant, different relationship. Does that make sense? That's why some people have a traumatic relationship with a drug and some people have a very good relationship with a drug, because their relationship that's been made has come from a different level. And you can at different stages, and I do this when I work with people who are addicted, is I change the relationship gradually, right? So it changes from one of addiction to becoming a healthy one, where it's actually a symbiotic relationship that serves both, okay? And it's looking at how things became the way they were, whether it's weed, whether it's cocaine, whether it's ayahuasca. It's looking at what things were originally used for, and normally the person has a memory in their DNA of an ancestor using a drug and achieving healing of some kind. Does that make sense? Yeah? And not remembering how. And it's teaching them how to work with it in the highest and best way, instead of from the level of an exchange or repression. Hello, Sarah, come on in. Okay. So, and when you start working with plant energies, you're dealing with the energy of transformation. Plants have an amazing ability that human beings don't have. Plants know how to turn light into energy. Through photosynthesis, they literally they're like breatharians, literally. 24 hours a day, that's all they do. They breathe, and then they turn light into energy, okay? So they're very, very advanced transformers from one modality into another. And when you're working with them, all your issues about being able to change will come up. Whether you're able to change, how much you can change, how much it's safe to change. Does that make sense? Yeah, because they're all about transformation energy. That's why drugs are used for instant healings. I have a headache, I take this pill, I don't have the pain anymore. It's an instant transformation. Yeah, I have I have an infection, I take the antibiotic, instant transformation. Does that make sense? However, just like I said to you before, plants cannot be used to cover up an issue. Okay, they can be used to resolve an issue. So when you're working with the plant kingdoms, if you're using, for example, let's say antibiotics to cover up anger or to repress anger, the infection will just come back. Does that make sense? There are other plants that you have to use on an emotional level, which is where I use essential oils or different herbs to work with the body to clear the emotional side effect. Yeah, and there are plants for everything. Like I work with the doTERRA essential oils, and there's an amazing essential oil called abradite that clears past lives. So if I've got a client, hey darling, welcome home. So if I've got a client who's really struggling with past lives, but really doesn't have any idea what they are and doesn't believe in them, but I know it needs to be resolved for them to get better, I'll get them to take abradite. Does that make sense? Because I know the plant has the consciousness that they need and it will resolve it. Okay? So plants have an infinite amount of intelligence. You could spend lifetime studying plants, studying their intelligence. You could spend one lifetime just on one plant. That's the depth of knowledge you're dealing with. Does that make sense? Yeah? Plants are very chatty. They sing. When you open up your clairaudience, you know, like Alice in Wonderland and the flowers are singing? Yeah, that's not a joke. That's for real. Yeah, they're constantly singing. That's why Archangel Gabriel has the signal for flowers. If you could hear those right now, they're like a really lovely A pitch, singing consistently. And when you walk into a rainforest, it's like a symphony. It's literally like an orchestra. So plants sing, okay? They really, really sing. And when you start working with them, this is how you can program them for different things through sound. This is why plants grow really well with sound. And I'll tell you a story. So you can see they're not here today because they're in another place, but normally we have gongs all the way around here, big gongs, okay? And that plant over there in the back, the one that's kind of a bit, I'll get one of the boys to water it in the break or something. It was given to me by my best friend on my wedding, okay? And it was in a box, completely closed. I didn't plant it. I didn't put it in soil. I didn't bring it because it was the middle of winter. I got married in December. And I was like, well, the time to plant this will be late February. You know, it won't be December 5th. Does that make sense? Yeah? And it was sitting on top of my fridge. Now that's electromagnetic energy. There's no, look back there. There's no natural light back there. Okay? There's no natural light back there. And then this one day, Todd and I go on a synchronicity walk and we come home and there was this song, by a lady who, and I really love blues, and it's Nora Jones, right? And there was a lady singing Nora Jones in the underground, but Todd didn't know what she was singing, and it was important as to find synchronicity, to link it together. And he called me and he said, what's she singing? And I was like, she's singing the song, you know, Turn Me On. And I remember the line from the song, like a flower coming into bloom, you know, like a light bulb in a darkened room. And I walked into the kitchen and on top of my fridge was this giant white flower poking out of the top of this box.
Wow.
With no light, with no light, it's just a miracle. And I was standing there going, right, how did that happen? And it's the gongs, it's the sound frequency. They were singing to each other. Does that make sense? When I asked my angels to show me what happened, they were singing to each other. And that just the energy of that was enough for it to move through. And they showed me how only 10% of the energy that the flower gets comes from the minerals in the soil and the food, and 90% comes from the air and from the environment and from the sound. And I was like, I had no idea that was true. I even Googled it afterwards just to make sure, because I was so interested in that. But that's how important sound is to plants. They're really, really in connection with the law of music, with the law of tone. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So when you're working with plants, if you want plants on your side, play music in the garden. Sing to them when they love it. They love to hear it. So do fairies, by the way. A lot of people, I remember the first time I saw a fairy, there was a lady, I was running an angel event almost 10 years ago now in Scotland. And in Aberdeen, and I was staying at her house because her house was a big space, and I'd seen angels for years, but I'd never seen fairies. But I was sitting in the garden singing away, and I've always loved to sing outside. And then suddenly I could see this like little being running across the water and like kicking, splashing water, and I was like, "What is that?" And then she was kind of like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm singing." And she was like, "Why are you singing? Other humans don't sing." And I was like, "Lots of humans sing." I was like, "Trust me." It's like, humans sing. And she was like, "Oh, humans sing. I've only heard flowers sing. It's like no one sings in this garden." And I was like, "Okay." And she was like, "You're interesting because you sing." And then poof, she was gone. And I was like, "Right." And I went back in and I was speaking to my little sister, because my little sister is really connected with fairies. And I was like, "What the hell was that?" And she was like, "You're not crazy. Calm the hell down. That's a fairy." And I was like, "Why was it talking to me?" And she was like, "Because they like people who sing." And then this other lady who's been trying to see them for years, she even leaves out bowls of milk and honey and stuff. She's like, "I've been trying for 20 years. And I was like, "Just go into the garden and sing," right? They like that more than they like food. They do like food, but they like it more. They like voice more. This is why people at festivals are normally surrounded by fairies or think they are fairies. It's constant music, right? All the fairies are like in absolute euphoria. They're like, there's music 24 hours a day, and all the plants, and they're singing and they're enjoying it as well. It's communion for them. Does that make sense? Because music is a language that goes across the planes. Right? So all these people come out of there really, have you noticed that people that go to festivals are very mischievous?
Yeah.
More so when they're at festivals than at any other time. Yeah, they just got this naughty streak in them when they're at the festival. That's because they're surrounded by elementals. Right? And all they want to do is party. Guess what elementals want to do in the middle of the summer? Midsummer Night's Dream, anyone? Yeah, they want to play pranks, they want to have fun, they want to explore different dimensions, they want to connect with people in different ways, and they want to have lots of sex. Okay, so elementals have very strong sexual energy, and you'll find like hybrids of things, half mermaid, half angel, half fairy, and off it goes, because they don't have the sexual shame that humans carry. Does that make sense? And they're not like angels, they're not androgynous, they do have a sexuality, so you come into contact with those beings, and you'll find like the divas of the trees, becoming really enchanted with fairies and all sorts. So it's really, really interesting, and this is why in Greek mythology you can read about the different divas and the different gods and how different hybrids and things were born and were created. Anyway, I got carried away there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Everybody with me about what happens on the second plane, yeah? So yeah, it's a huge expansive plane, and we can go more into it. But the second plane also provides vitamins. And it provides them in a shape and size the body can absorb, which you can't get from chalk, and you can't get, which is why so many vitamins are just peed out. Okay, same thing with the soil. If it's not small enough, your body can't absorb it. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's why plant-based vitamins and minerals are the best on the planet, period. The issue that you have to be careful with is that because we've destroyed the soil, if there's no minerals in the soil, there'll be no minerals in the plants. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's not that there's anything wrong with the plant, but that the soil literally needs to be remineralized. And this is why they used to have years where fields went unplanted or they were just covered in weeds, because those weeds were remineralizing the soil. Yeah. So even nowadays, we're experiencing like a lot of food that's organic, and we're like, why isn't it doing the healing or stuff that it's supposed to do? And people are saying, yeah, organic food is enough, and I got healed by organic food. And normally when that happens, they're in an area where there's a very high mineral content in the soil. So they're getting very high levels of minerals, very high levels of clays, and very high levels of vitamins just carried inside the plants that they're eating. Right? If you're in somewhere like London, you really need to be taking something that actually from plants where they actually contain minerals. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? It's also why a lot of people say, oh, I tried minerals and vitamins and it didn't work, or because they didn't know whether it was actually anything in there or whether it was in a form they could absorb. So it's always checking in with your body through muscle testing or through kinesiology, or through actually blood tests to find out whether or not it's being absorbed, whether it's not being absorbed. Yeah. Doctors are very good at injecting you with things like iron, but it's too big a form and you can't absorb it. And one of my ex-boyfriend's moms had severe iron absorption problems, and she was getting injected with iron. She still couldn't absorb it. But 3 months on a plant-based mineral vitamin and she was sorted. Okay, it's just because the body needs to have it in a form that they can absorb it. Okay, third kingdom, animals and humans. So this plane is all about emotional mastery, the mastery of illusions, and time and space as laws. Okay, so all of this world, and this is where we're coming to the Course in Miracles realm, is a world of illusion. Okay, everything here, much as I think I'm solid and you're solid, we're not. We're just made up of atoms. There's actually more space in between our atoms than anything else. Does that make sense? Yep. Yeah. But I experience myself as separate from you. I experience myself as having a solid physical body. I experience myself as being separate from this chair. And in that experience, I'm learning through working with the law of illusion. Does that resonate with everybody? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I work with the law of illusion and dualism, I'm learning unity, but at the same time, I'm learning biolocation. I'm learning how to be kind of omnipresent, how to be present with my multidimensional being, with my light on all the different levels, and still be human. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So the law of illusion allows you to learn omnipresence through separation. Sorry, just wait for the... So we learn a lot through the law of illusion. A lot of people have the belief that illusion is only bad. Okay? Illusion is not bad. That's the very, very third plane way of looking at things. This is what I mean by dualism. Everything on the third plane is black and white, good and bad, right and wrong. Everything is very dualistic. So if you think that the third plane and the truth of everything is not black and white, it's a rainbow. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? 7 planes of existence, 7 colors in the rainbow. Yeah, 7 different sound, tone frequencies or spectrums within all the other frequencies fit into. You're really looking at understanding that the truth is not black and white, it's a color. Black contains all the colors of the rainbow, white contains all the colors of the rainbow. Does that make sense? So when you say black or white, it's an ultimate truth because they're both containing everything. Does that make sense? But it's an oversimplification which creates drama. Okay? Now, there is a difference between right and wrong, between good and evil, and it's not about judgment, it's about discernment. Right? You're not looking at whether something is good or bad or right and wrong. You're looking at whether or not it's going to bring peace, whether it's going to bring happiness, whether it's going to bring joy, or whether working through the law of cause and effect it's going to bring suffering. Does that resonate with everybody? And there is a huge difference between judgment and discernment. I know it's a tricky one. I know particularly when you're starting out on your spiritual journey, it's one of the biggest triggers because people are like, there is no difference. There's a humongous difference between judgment and discernment. It takes practice to figure that out. Okay? It doesn't happen overnight. It's a state of emotional and intellectual mastery of your beliefs. Because you can't just change a belief in judgment on an intellectual level, you have to change it on a spiritual level, you have to change it on an emotional level, you have to change it on an ancestral level. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it's not something you can just say, oh, I'm not going to judge anybody anymore and it'll just disappear. Okay, which is what a lot of people try and do. Judgment is a multifaceted thing and it's a protective thing. Because until you acquire the muscle, the spiritual musculature of discernment, you can't do without judgment. Does that make sense? Yeah? Until you acquire a better system, you need the old one. It's like me taking all the systems off of your computer, but never replacing them with anything. Your computer wouldn't be able to function. It's the same thing with you. If I want to take out a very old system, I have to replace it with a newer and better model, right? Now, it might take time for you to figure out how it works. If you've ever sworn at your Mac or your Windows program, you'll know what I mean, right? But it's still better than the old system. Does that resonate with everybody? I'm not saying it won't have its quirks. I'm not saying that there aren't still complications when you're using discernment, and that emotionally it's not still hard to do, because even though you may master discernment, you still have to master attachment. Does that make sense? You can master discernment on an intellectual level, but not have mastered attachment, detachment, and compassion and emotional kindness. So you can be making decisions from a place of discernment, but not have the emotional maturity to be able to hold them in a way that's kind. It's like when someone's very, very honest, but they're a bit like a bull in a china shop, and they're in there with a wrecking ball, and they're like, I'm just being honest, and you're like, yeah, but you're kind of being an asshole too. Teal Swan has an amazing video called being honest versus being an asshole, and it's exactly that's the same level of discernment. It's learning how to be discerning without using your judgments to harm other people. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? So that's what you're really coming up against on this level of existence. There's also dramas because there's the energies on the third plane are like the daughters or sons of fifth plane energies. And this is how religions were kind of born, because these godlike beings on the fifth plane of existence, which is above the astral planes, wanted to experience themselves in multiple physicalities at the same time, whether they were angels or gods or goddesses. And this is how the idea for the third plane was first kind of come into being. Does that make sense? And this is why so many religions have stories of you being a child, right? You're the child of God. You're the child of Shiva or Buddha. Does that make sense? But it's not the highest truth. You are way more than the child of another being, but those are your spiritual parents. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? And that's why you have the mother, father, God, and this idea that God is your father and your mother. Because it's that fifth plane energy versus sixth or seventh plane energy where you're still connecting with that as the ultimate state of being. Does that make sense? Yeah. But even fifth plane beings, fifth dimensional beings, and fourth dimensional beings, which is the astral planes, and we'll get onto that in a minute, they still have attachment to form. That's why angels show themselves with wings. That's why ascended masters shapeshift and take different shapes. They still use symbolism, they still use form, they still use the subconscious mind to communicate. Does that make sense? Yeah, and they're still completing different lessons and acquiring different virtues. There's a lot of different virtues. Does that make sense? Yeah, there's literally hundreds of them. So they're willing to come back over and over again and master the different planes over and over again, the same way I do the Course in Miracles over and over again, right, to get to different levels of depth and understanding. Also, because there are only 7 planes, but there are millions of dimensions separated by time and space within those dimensions. So for example, planet Earth 400 years ago, completely different learning experience than planet Earth now. Does that make sense? So if you wanted to completely master and graduate the Earth plane system, you would have to incarnate into every time, into every space, and as everything that's ever been inside the planet. Does that make sense? Or you would have to separate yourself into different parts at the same time so you could experience all those things at once. And that's what that's why fifth plane and third plane are so connected. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? Okay. So healers from the third plane of existence often get very caught up in the drama of illusion and dualism and group consciousness. So this is where they also believe that people cannot heal themselves, that they need other energies to heal them. So it's this idea that you can heal, but I have to give you my energy. So you find a lot of stuff around people are draining my energy, a lot of empaths that are still connected to the fourth plane. Many lifetimes ago, you used to have to exchange eyes, organs, body parts in order to get your spiritual gifts. Yeah, we've already discussed this in some of the seminars, but this comes up around fourth plane of existence. It's all around sacrifice. Now these 2 books here, which are the Theta Healing books, go into more depth. One's the Theta Healing Basic, and the other is the Theta Advanced, and there's actually a 7 planes of existence book, okay, that just goes into each of the 7 planes. But what it says in here about fourth plane stuff, and I marked it for you because it's the one after, not before. Okay, so beliefs that you will come up when you're working with fourth planes. With the fourth planar, I have to suffer to learn. I have to learn the hard way. The more I suffer, the closer I am to God. It's all right. Today's definitely phone day. I have to go through a death door to grow spiritually. So a lot of people believe they have to die in order to meet God. Okay, they can't meet God or the gods while they're alive. Very common beliefs in the Vikings, right? They have to die before they can go to Valhalla. You get judged after you die if you're a Christian, right? So there's a lot of particular masculine energy that carries these beliefs that that you will that they have to kill somebody in order to bring justice to the world, because judgment only happens after death. Does that make sense? Yeah? And it's the same thing that happened in a lot of courts of law or legal systems. They're like, you're going to meet your maker and you'll be judged. Does that make sense? Yeah? So a lot of those old beliefs come up around fourth plane stuff. So you basically pull them. So can we release those beliefs? Would that be okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's done. It's done. Show me. And can I download this half of the room with safety?
Yes.
There you go. And can we download you with, you know how to learn without suffering, that you know how to learn from the Creator, that you know how to learn with ease and freedom, that you know the definition of dedication to the Creator of all that is, that you know how to always be connected with the Creator of all that is, that you know how to grow spiritually through the Creator of all that is.
Yes.
Thank you. It's done. Show me. Okay, it's much better now. So because in this plane there's a belief that, like we're talking about, there's good and evil, a lot of people believe that they have to fight evil to become closer to God, right? This is what the whole Knights Templar, kill the Muslims, this is what that mentality is. Does that make sense? They're using conflict to connect with truth. Out of conflict, they find deeper meaning, they find deeper truth. It's not the only way to learn, but some people have the belief that they have to fight for everything. Does that make sense? They have to fight for love, they have to fight for the good in their lives. This is an internal war, okay? And this is what's happening on this level of understanding. So this is why humans still have wars amongst themselves. You also have wayward spirits, kind of on this plane. So this is what kind of comes up when you're dealing with people who have refused to go into the light. It's also around judgment, okay? And I dealt with this a lot when I lived in Scotland, and especially when I came to London. I used to have queues of people outside my bedroom window waiting to pass over, right? And the reason was that I wasn't scared of them, and some of them looked absolutely hideous. Now, the things that we've done to people before they die can leave them looking very deformed in death. Does that make sense? Yeah. If I ripped you open, if I peeled your skin off, if I did horrific other forms of torture to you, or you're going to look really weird, right? You're going to be, your idea of yourself as a human body is going to be pretty mangled. Then on top of that, if I leave you sitting in the in-between planes or the bardo states for another 400 years, you're going to decay a bit. Right? So you're going to look very funny. And this is where the ideas of mummies and stuff come in. This is why so many children get scared by monsters under the bed. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? Whereas I wasn't scared of them. And they're terrified of going into the light. Why? Because before they were tortured or before something bad happened to them, they were told that they were going to go to hell. That when they finally went into the light, the torture would start again. It would go on for eternity. Like hell, they're going anywhere near the light. Does that make sense? Yeah? So you're dealing with a lot of trauma and passing those beings over, but they're not on the fourth plane because they haven't gone into the light. They don't want to go anywhere near the astral. Does that make sense? So it's humans, animals, and kind of earthbound spirits, wayward spirits. You can clear wayward spirits without someone's permission. It's the two things you can do. Clear wayward spirits, send unconditional love. Okay? So if I'm walking down the street and I see somebody that has waywards, I will just clear them because that person can connect with those beings at any point through it in a more healthy way. Does that resonate? Yeah? But this is this energy of I'm being drained, people are taking my energy, I have to do God's job for him, there is no God, or I can only do the will of God, I can't do anything that I want. It's these conflicts around third plane, and it's all about the difference between how you feel about something and the truth about something. Right? So you're dealing with emotional truths and emotional mastery, and you bless their hearts. You have a lot of people who progress spiritually through intellectual mastery and through physical mastery. So for example, I'm reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Living and Dying, and one of the first things that I read was them doing this practice, and it said you have to do this practice 100,000 times before you're ready to progress to this level. And I did a double take. I went back and I was like, 100,000 times. And I know I've had a few lifetimes as a monk. And so I checked in. I was like, did I really do this? 100,000 times. And they were like, yep. And I was like, then what's going on? And they were explaining how you can achieve intellectual mastery and physiological mastery without ever achieving emotional mastery. Does that make sense? Yeah? There are emotional laws and there are intellectual laws. Okay? And you can do a lot just by mastering the intellectual laws, the laws of time and space, the laws of awareness, the laws of presence, the laws of physics, right? Mastering your intellect. But you can't bend those laws without the laws of compassion, mercy, grace, peace, because it's not safe. Does that make sense? Yeah, you can do it through brute force, but then there are karmic consequences. The only way to bend or work with a law of the universe without karmic consequences is by mastering emotional laws, otherwise known as virtues. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah. And because spirituality has been so heavily intellectualized, there's a lot of people who are deeply spiritual, have a deep spiritual practice, have had it for lifetimes, but still don't have emotional mastery. They have intellectual mastery and they have physical mastery. So they're born being able to do backflips and all sorts of things and bend themselves into crazy sorts of shapes. And they're like yogis when they're children, but they don't have any patience, and they're still dealing with superiority, and they're still dealing with abusive power issues because they haven't mastered the emotional laws or the virtues. Does that make sense? And I hear this a lot, particularly from women who are dating spiritual men. They're like, how is this possible? He's so enlightened here and such a divvy over there. And same thing with people who are dating spiritual teachers, because they have an intellectual mastery of something, but they don't have the emotional mastery of something. Does that make sense? And they know they're a master, so they're arrogant. Right? And they don't believe they've got anything left to learn. So they're standing there going, I've figured this out. Why am I still here? And then it's the next one, which is, this is my last life on this planet. I'm like, no. See, the 100,000 lives you did for mastering the intellectual stuff, now you're going to be doing 100,000 to master the emotional stuff. And we're going to be here until we all get it. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, but it comes up a lot. I'm making light of it, but it's a big deal, both for men and for women. This is why a lot of spiritual teachers go through so many divorces, why they can't have intimate relationships with their families, and why they believe that they have to choose between family and their divine life purpose. Okay, all this stuff comes up around third plane energy. Positive side of this realm is the power animals, the power guides, the power spirits. These amazing creatures. In shamanic circles, they use the panther to achieve emotional mastery. They use the hummingbird to achieve spiritual emotional mastery. They use the serpent to look at literally the emotional realms, like the shadow realms. Does that make sense? Yeah. So they use these different animals, these symbolism, these power animals to clear different things. So there's an amazing shaman called Alessandro Villaldo, and he wrote this book called Shaman Healer Sage. And he wrote a few other ones as well. It's been a while since I've read them. But he goes into depth on how basically they use the snake to clear up old patterns, because the snake can shed its skin. So it's teaching you how to be able to release old patterns without losing yourself. Also this idea of being reborn over and over again and rising from the ashes, symbolic of the reptilian brain. Does that make sense to everybody? The fight, flight, freeze response. Then they move up to the panther, which is the realm of the emotions, hunting and killing down emotional shadows, emotional mastery. Then they move up to the eagle, which is the higher perspective, which is what we talk about in the Course in Miracles. A miracle is a shift in perspective from one of fear to one of love. Does that make sense? And they use animals to achieve this. They're like, yeah, you know, if you're looking at a forest from inside the trees, you don't know how to get out. But if you look at it from the perspective of the eagle, you can tell where it ends. And if you follow a stream, you know how to get there. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? And then they use the hummingbird as an example, or they use whales if you're an Eskimo, because these animals migrate for hundreds of thousands of miles on nothing but their intuition and their faith. In A Course in Miracles, Marianne Williamson talks about faith is one of the emotional virtues. Faith not being blind, it being visionary. Right? Now, when you're inside an airplane, you in the middle of a cloud, for example, it comes over you. You don't panic when you're in the middle of a cloud. You switch on your radar, right? And then you can fly through the cloud and still get to your destination. When you're going somewhere and you're in the middle of this emotional cloud, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's fear, whether it's doubt, you can switch on your radar, i.e. you can switch on your faith. Does that make sense? Yeah. Provided you've installed faith in your little spiritual airplane, you can switch it on, right? And then it will guide you through the illusion of that emotion to get home, back to happiness, back to peace. Does that resonate with everyone? Yeah? In the same way that these animals, you know, migrate, it's a hummingbird. It literally crosses the globe. Right? Whales migrate for hundreds of thousands of miles. Buffalo, there's loads of different animals that give you the strength to do something that you don't know how to do. Does that make sense? Especially when you're making that migration, that journey without distance from the mind to the heart for the first time. Because they make that journey without distance every time they go and migrate. Does that make sense? It's also teaching divine timing and working in harmony with the cycles of the earth. okay? Being connected with the cycles of the earth, knowing what the cycles of the earth are. Because animals work with the earth. When it starts to get cold in one area, they go to the warm area, right? They don't deprive themselves. They don't stay in the really freezing cold area of the planet, but they do actually go and move somewhere warmer, then they move back. Does that make sense? In doing that, they carry the minerals and the seeds from one side of the planet to the other, right? They fertilize the planet. They're of service. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And they equally give that part of the planet that's in winter time to rest, because they're not trying to cultivate it whilst it's meant to be resting, right? So they work in harmony backwards and forwards. So everybody understanding the third plane and what we're trying to master and understand here, yeah? And why so many of us are emotionally retarded, yeah? Because we're here to develop emotional mastery. If you knew it, you wouldn't be here. Does that resonate with everybody, yeah? So you're here to develop emotional mastery, and you're here to understand that emotions are flow, they're emotional, but they're also really, really powerful. Emotions are not thoughts, okay? Thoughts are rational, emotions are emotional. Okay? They don't build and grow in the same ways. It's the most irrational thing on the planet to think emotions are thoughts. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And often when you're doing a clearing, so when we do emotions, we do a clearing of beliefs on the 4 levels. You can also clear emotions on on 4 levels. Sometimes it's a symbiotic relationship. If you've been clearing beliefs and you cleared them on the 4 levels and they're still not moving, it's a bottom emotion, not a bottom thought. Does that make sense? Yeah? Because the trauma might have been pre-verbal, or it might have been prefrontal cortex. So let's say it happens in the womb, or it happens when there's been brain damage, for example, or when you're in surgery, or when you're in a heightened state or an altered state of awareness where you're on drugs. You can't verbalize it, and it's an emotional state of trauma. Does that make sense? Yeah. We call it in Alcoholics Anonymous, they call it free-floating feelings. The person doesn't know why they feel that way, they just do. They have no memory of it. They can't verbalize what it feels like, but that feeling is around. So it's a free-floating feeling. So you'll find a lot of that stuff with humans. They'll be like, I don't know why I feel this way, I don't know what this is, and what they're developing, the lessons they're learning, is emotional mastery. Okay? Everybody ready with the third plane? Can we move on to the fourth?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So 4th kingdom, astral planes and ancestors. So this is more my husband's realm than mine. He does a much better job. If you want to come to one of his talks, he does amazing talks on the astral planes and on lucid dreaming. And this is his place to hang out. He's been he's got such a deep connection with it since he was a child and from other lifetimes. He's an amazing teacher about the astral planes. He teaches people how to astral project. That's actually what we're doing in Portugal for the week that we're not having the talk here, which is not next week, the week after. We're actually teaching astral projection, or he's teaching astral projection, and I'm lying in the sun. Astral planes are vast, okay? This plane contains your ancestors, aliens, life between life, and spiritual communities, okay? So in this book, it's only going to talk about the ancestors. Okay, this is one area where, much as I love Viana, I've got more experience, and I'm married to the king of the astral. So, because the astrals are more vast than just our planet. Okay, just like the mineral kingdoms aren't limited to planet Earth. All the planets have minerals. Does that make sense? Yeah, the whole of the universe experiences sound, not just planet Earth, not just human beings. The whole of the universe experiences emotions in different ways than we do, but it does. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So the astral planes are expansive. They're expansive to all of the multiverses, right? So you have all of the different beings from all of the different times, places, dimensions, and all the different species of different beings on the astral planes, right? Which is where you find the ancestors. You also have the large communities of people. We've got the largest number of people that we've ever had incarnate on planet Earth at the moment. Incarnate. There's about at least 100 times that number on the astral planes. Okay, they're literally planets on there to be explored. And this is where the last plane we were kind of talking about the emotional candy, right? Getting caught up in the emotional candy, as it were, in the sense of you have an emotion come up and then you decide you're gonna, you kind of stay low for years and years and years. You get really pulled into that emotion. Does that make sense? Same thing as a man locking himself in his room and getting really obsessed with maths for years and years and years. It's the same level of intellect. You're kind of going deep so you can get a mastery of a subject. Does that make sense? But you don't actually understand it well enough. So you're still really struggling with it. Does that resonate with everyone? Yeah? There are some, think about all the mathematicians that have locked themselves in rooms for years and years and never managed to come up with anything new. Never managed to break a formula. Never managed to create something different. Right? There are lots of them. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? It's the same thing with people who lock themselves in a room with an emotion and can't get out of it. Okay? They can't get out of the box. They're still in the box. Even though they're trying to achieve mastery, they don't know how to. Because you can't solve a problem from the same level that it was made. You have to go to a different level. Yeah? And this is why the scientists who did solve problems were sitting in the bathtub or under the tree, and because they were connecting with it from other levels. They were outside in nature, so you're talking plants and mineral kingdoms, right? And they were open to higher states of consciousness. So they were allowing, they would let go. But the same thing can happen intellectually as happens emotionally. So this plane is the ancestors and spiritual communities and contracts, agreements, things like that. So this is where people are before birth and where they go after death. This is where the bardo states lead to. So if you're on the near earth planes and you go into the light, you're going to find yourself on the astral planes. Does that make sense? Yeah? The astral planes are vast. So you might find yourself in the lower worlds, in the higher worlds, in a religious heaven somewhere. Okay, they're huge. It's like someone saying to you, hey, can you please tell me about planet Earth? And you describing Britain to them and thinking you've understood the planet. Does that make sense? Yeah? Lots of people go up onto the astral planes, experience one area of the astral planes, come back and go, this is what the astral planes is. Right? But it's so much bigger than that. Does that make sense to everybody? The astral planes are huge. They are vast. They're as vast as the multiverse. The same way that you can't begin to explore the multiverse, we can't begin to completely explore the astral. Does that resonate with everybody? It's huge. It's also not as bound by the laws of time and space as this world is. So you'll find things like mirror realms. It's why you kind of experience the astral planes when you're on psychedelics and you see like mirrors of things. Or everyone here read Alice in Wonderland? Yeah, it's that energy of one world melting into another world, melting into another world. It's why the Buddhists explain this reality as a dream. Does that make sense? It says the astral world is very like a dream, but it's as real as this world is. And there are complete lifetimes up there. Like complete lifetimes where you were born and died on the astral. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? And, contrary to popular opinion, people on the astral plane eat, sleep, drink. They're very human in that way, or if you go into an astral city, there will be restaurants, people will be eating food. Okay, they're still physically identified. They will have their own, and the same thing with alternative alien realities and stuff like that. Whatever culture, community they had in that time space on their planet is the community they will have up there on the astral. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah. You'll also find very surreal, repetitive environments, like that are really strange. Like I've forgotten the name of that book, but it's with Robin Williams.
What Dreams May Come.
What Dreams May Come. Has everybody seen What Dreams May Come? If you haven't seen it, amazing film. Right? It's quite sad at the beginning, but it's a brilliant film. It's about Robin Williams' wife dies, and then she gets taken into the lower astral, and he goes to find her. Okay, and it's an amazing depiction of the astral planes and the different levels that there are to it. It's absolutely insanely beautiful, and you can see how these people create different worlds based on their emotions on the astral planes as well. It's a very, very vast place. Okay. So you also have amazing healing temples. I have a friend called Rhiannon who's a channel, and she had cancer a few years ago, and she healed herself of cancer completely by working with the plants and with the guidance she was getting from the astral planes by going up to the healing temples. Does that make sense? Now, she didn't tell anybody because she was told not to tell anybody that she was unwell, because she was told that they would manifest an illness for her or manifest it being worse than it was, and she just worked through it completely. And then came out with nothing at the end. Does that make sense? So there are lower energies and there are higher energies. You will find piles of people just sleeping with each other. Okay, Todd can probably recommend. Todd, yes. Can you come and recommend some astral books for people?
Mine?
Yeah, yours would be good if you just write it.
It's in the astral. In what context?
Just for them, like the I don't know, just the favorite astral books that you have.
As in what, learning?
Yeah, because I'm telling them, I'm teaching them a bit about the astral planes and the ancestral planes. I basically put ancestors, aliens, life between lives, spiritual communities, heavens and hells. But what would you like recommend they start with if they want to explore?
I would start with, there's a guy named William Bowman.
There you go.
It's spelled B-U-H-L-M-A-N. And the book is titled Adventures Beyond the Body. That would be the first one. Second one would be a classic by Robert Monroe. Robert Monroe wrote 3 books. I'd start with his third book, which is called Ultimate Journey, and then go to his first book, which is called Journeys Beyond the Body, and then his middle book, Far Journeys. So anything by Robert Monroe, anything by William Bowman. Bowman's also written 3 books. And for some good inspiration, I'd also recommend Jürgen Ziva. So Jürgen, J-U-R-G-E-N, Ziva, Z-I-E, I don't know, I can't remember. But his book is titled Multidimensional Man. You can easily find that on Amazon. And for a real good read from a scientist, I would recommend by Tom Campbell, My Big Toe.
That's a big book.
It's a trilogy, that's why it's big. It's 3 books in one.
Like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's really a lot of good science, and William Bowman will give you some good metaphysics with quantum physics as well. So his stuff is really good, and yeah, that's probably a good starting point.
Lots of information. Thank you.
Yeah. So you're going to come up with oaths, vows, promises, and obligations from the 4th plane. Okay, agreements that you made with your ancestors to live their dreams for them. Okay.
Why would you do that? It just doesn't make sense.
Vows, if you vowed to vows of celibacy, vows of chastity, vows of poverty, vows to serve a God forevermore. Particularly an issue when different religions were discovering each other, like when the Vikings discovered that Christians existed and the Christians discovered that Muslims existed, right? Because there was a stage before we knew other religions existed. And it depended how isolated you were. If you were all the way up in Normandy, the chances of you discovering Taoism were minimal. Does that make sense? So there was this war of the gods that kind of landed on the astral planes. Right, with people switching from one heaven to another as they were going in between incarnations, choosing different gods, going through different realities, and all this stuff, this war of the gods comes up when you're dealing and working with the astral planes. Also this belief that you're going to be attacked, psychically attacked as you start working with the light. The more you step into the light, comes up a lot around the shamans and stuff as well. The spiders are coming down, the ETs, the reptilians, all of this conspiracy stuff is also 4th plane energy, and people learn a lot through it because they're finding the truth. Does that make sense? They're learning from the law of truth. This is an ultimate law. Okay, so people who are concerned with this stuff, all of them, one of their core law that they're working with is the law of truth, and they're willing to look at the hard stuff to find the truth. Does that make sense? Yeah? You'll typically... Huh? I fell down. Crashing and banging. It's all the elementals. Right, on you go.
Could you please say it again? Those people who work with those conspiracy ideas and reptilians and those, they are working with the law of truth.
Yep. Have you seen Jupiter Ascending?
No.
A really good film, watch it. Okay? But it gives you a higher perspective of the universe, big context-wise, right? So it's a bit like the books Todd was recommending, and this is the thing about the astral planes. You're not in Kansas anymore. Okay, you know, like in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy flies out and it's like, oh, Kansas is gone. You're now in, you're now in Oz. It's the same scenario when you're on the astral planes. Your beliefs that human beings are the only living species in the universe kind of get destroyed because it's not true. Right? Your beliefs that only good exists in the universe get destroyed because it's not true. Then you start to see, just the way that you see corruption on the human level, you see corruption on other levels. Does that make sense? Yeah? And there's a lot of interdimensional racism, interspecies racism, which we shall not indulge in, a lot of species name calling. I remember when I was on one of my first dates with Todd, and he asked me about reptilians. We were in an Indian restaurant, and I was like, and he asked me about reptilians, and I was like, I don't do interdimensional racism. I was like, we have an army too. And if you see what our army's doing and how it's invading on other dimensions, you wouldn't want to even look, you know? But it's this idea, because it's still this war type mentality, that these species are bad, these species are good. It's never that black and white. Does that make sense? You can't paint a whole planet or planets with one brush. It's not fair to. Even comparing the human race on this planet compared to the human race on another planet, well, you get a completely different story. Does that make sense? Yeah? So you can't just tar everything with the same brush. But human beings are still in that black and white duality stage. If something bad happened, then that whole species is bad. Yeah? And we do it with each other. All the blacks are bad. No. All the Chinese are bad. No. All the Russians are bad. We do it all the time. Does that make sense? And it's natural that it would happen with aliens. Now, there are things going on with aliens that aren't the best, that aren't for the highest and best good. There is a lot of, people being abducted and hybrid children and experiments and also with the permission of the government, so I'm not going to lie about that either. But you see what I mean by we're not in Kansas anymore. Okay? Suddenly it goes from being rosy and we're talking to flowers and bees and plants and trees to we're talking about this stuff. Because you're talking about the collective consciousness. So when you're dealing with this, you're talking about learning how to navigate consent, the law of cause and effect on a collective level. Does that make sense? How to share the universe, how to share your own space. You're talking about understanding free agency and free will, and learning about truth, learning about consent. Because there's a lot of different beliefs and rules about consent. Does that make sense to everybody? And that's what you're figuring out on the astral planes. Sexual consent, emotional consent, physical consent, spiritual consent. Like, is it all right if I only have sex with you on the astral planes even though you said no to me in real life? Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? That kind of weird stuff does happen, predominantly because people aren't really conscious of what they're doing on the astral planes. Just like people aren't really conscious of what they're doing in their unconscious mind. They're unconscious, they fall asleep. Yeah? In A Course in Miracles and in the Bible it says Adam fell asleep. Nowhere does it say that he woke up. Yeah? And it's the same thing. Until you become a practiced astral projector or a lucid dreamer, you have no idea what the hell you're doing or why you're doing it on the astral planes. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Last night, I was somehow doing, what's the name of that guy that does the Messiah complex?
Russell Brand.
Yeah. Last night, I was definitely up to something with Russell Brand.
Skylar, Acamesis.
Not anything sexual, right? But I was in this house. Yeah, I really was. And I was like, why the hell am I here? But it's things like that. There are times where I'm conscious enough in a dream to know something funny is going on. But there are times where I will remember in the morning. There are times where I'm conscious enough to stop it in the middle. Does that make sense? Yeah? But there are times where you're just sitting there going, how the hell did I get here? And it's because if your mind is undisciplined, so is your spiritual body, so is your energy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah? So, and your astral body is not limited by physicality. You can be in many places at once, the same way an angel can be in many places at once. So when I'm asleep, I can be with my family. I can be somewhere having an experience with Russell Brand. I can be over here healing a past life. I can be over there doing something else. And it's really surreal. Does that make sense? Yeah? And it's also why so many people wake up in the morning fucking exhausted. Right? Because they haven't learned how to biolocate using creator's energy, and they're trying to biolocate with their own energy, and they're everywhere.
Do you think it's possible then that you can have you can make an agreement somewhere that you do what you do in the astral planes whilst you're asleep, but then when you wake up you have no recollection of it whatsoever?
Oh yeah.
I think that's me actually, because I never remember anything. I cannot remember anything. I never.
Totally. You can, and you can not. So everybody's seen X-Men?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And everybody's seen Men in Black? What happens to you if you see something you're not supposed to see?
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So amnesia is not a new concept. Do most of you remember your past lives? No. Do you think you have an unconscious agreement and a belief that you're not supposed to see them? Yeah? That you were going to leave it up to a god somewhere on a fifth plane? Yeah, you probably do.
Is that lack of responsibility? Why is that decision?
It's about, we're learning about consent and we're also learning about surrender. Like the difference, it's a dance. It's not a game, it's genuinely a dance. So in order for you to experience, like for example, for me to make love to somebody, I have to allow them to make love to me, right? If I try and do it with myself, it's just masturbation. So the same thing, for me to experience real divinity, I have to experience it outside of myself, I have to experience it within myself, I have to experience it coming through something else and coming through me. I have to have the full spectrum of experience of divinity. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So as you're going through different levels of understanding, unless you get to the point where you're able to channel, where you're able to learn multiple things at once, where you can do what we're doing and download different things, you can't learn without experience. You can't actually imprint it in your DNA. Does that make sense? The DNA, non-average, for the average human person, only changes through direct experience and through environment. So you have to have that experience. Most people don't know how to tune into their DNA and change it. It's becoming a thing, but it wasn't a thing. And if I spoke to the mind, body, spirit, even New Age circles about it 15 years ago, people would be like, moo, 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 moo. Do you know what I mean? Right? They believe you can walk on water, but you can't change DNA. There's strange beliefs, right, that still go on. But that's what I mean. This is what I mean by, particularly when you're working on the astral planes. So I'll go through the beliefs that are here. So, what are the beliefs? Yeah, go ahead.
So we may be making an agreement, or we might have made an agreement in the astral plane with someone that we also meet here, but it's totally different or unknown to us. Is that
Yep.
what happens?
And lots of very angry men and women about that. I hear it all the time. But you're my soulmate. And the other one I hear all the time is, but you had sex with me last night in a dream. I honestly hear that, particularly because we do a lot of lucid dream workshops. And people are like, you are sexually interested in me. Yeah, I know, because we had sex. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean we're in a committed relationship on the planet. And then Todd once had this lady come onto his workshop who was there because she was upset that one of her partners was having astral sex with someone else.
As you do.
As a rule, for me, what happens on a different dimension stays on a different dimension. But some people get their knickers in a twist. I shouldn't laugh because they really get upset, but I can't help it. It's those stages where you realize that it's a loss of control. You realize that your partner is a multidimensional being, and they've got so much more going on than you could possibly imagine or possibly control. You know, parallel lives, interdimensional lives, astral lives, this whole jealousy and possession thing starts to pass away. Does that make sense? Now, I'm not saying that monogamous, intimate relationships aren't really good. I personally adore mine. But there's different planes have different rules and different learning experiences, and you can't control things like that in that way. It's just not how it works. But yeah, you can, and most people do. Most people have agreements on the astral because you make agreements before you're born, but then you are allowed to change those agreements. Okay? So if you have an opportunity for higher learning and you decide to change some agreements, then you can. Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah? Like if you make an agreement, like for me, when I first came onto this planet, my agreement was to change the political system through being a lawyer. Right? So I was on the track as an indigo, I was on the track to go in, you know, I was doing law school, I was in my law degree, I was on the track to fixing the world through modifying the political system and being an activist, right? And then I reached the age of 19 years old and I come across a human being who's capable of advancing my spiritual development on a level that I hadn't even imagined, and I go pop. Does that make sense? All those agreements suddenly get rewritten and recancelled, and I've decided that I'm going to do it by educating people through a spiritual modality, and the spiritual and political activism are going to come through the spiritual movement instead of through a political movement or the legal movement. Does that make sense? Yeah? Same way Gandhi or Martin Luther King did it, but it came through different ways. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? I was happily going along doing my thing with my angel healing modality. Suddenly I fell into theta, right? And then all of my life agreements changed. Does that resonate with everybody?
Absolutely.
Yeah? if you look at my health, for example, I was really, really ill in my teens, and I was probably going to suffer with extremely bad illnesses. I remember being about 11, 13 years old and really thinking, I'm not going to live to be 30. You know, if I'm this ill now, I'm not going to live to be 30. And then because of that, because I said to Creator, you know, I don't want this. You know, show me a different way. There has to be a different way. Even when people were telling me that I was going to be ill for the rest of my life, the answers came. Does that make sense? Yeah? And that completely changed my life path.
You have a choice.
You always have a choice, right? But you're learning about free agency. I had to give up my belief that all my choices were made for me, that life was fated, right? Which is a belief about God. Does that make sense? It lasts 400 years, particularly if you're Catholic, Viking, there's a belief that you're fated. So whether you're going to live or die today is not up to you. Does that make sense? It belongs to the gods, right? So you've got all these different things that come into play. So I had to decide, yeah, okay, I'm willing to give up that contract on the astral planes and on the fifth planes in my heart and be like, I choose something else, right? Which is a big risk. Many people make that decision every day, but until they've had the kind of general education that I'm giving to you guys right now, they don't know why or how something happened. Does that make sense? Yeah? And other stuff comes up around this plane as well. So around this plane, a lot of people try to heal by absorbing in healing straight into themselves. Right? Pardon?
How?
You just suck someone's energy out.
Okay.
So let's say I scan somebody's body and I see that they're carrying resentment, and that resentment's causing cancer, for example. I absorb that resentment into my own body. And I hold it there. And it only leaves me when I die. Does that make sense? They used to have the concept in medieval times of sin eaters. Everybody heard of sin eaters? So basically, you would put all of your negative energy into bread, and then someone would eat it, so that you wouldn't be judged for your sins when you died. It's very similar to that. It's this idea of an exchange of energy versus a transformation of energy. Does that make sense? It's like I moved that energy from here to here. You know when you really don't want to clean your house and you shove everything in the cupboard instead of actually cleaning it? It's a bit like that. You really don't want to do your spiritual work, so you're going to shove it in the cupboard. Right? And then you're going to come across it at some point. But that's what happens. It's the basics of spiritual building. So you're learning how to build spiritual musculature, but you're still at that stage. And I'll use a food metaphor. You know when people are really overweight and they decide they're going to go on a diet, but they think that diet is like a short-term thing. It's like a week or 2 weeks. They don't realize it's for the rest of your life, really. If you want to have a different lifestyle, if you want to have a different body, it's going to be for a long time. That's a different way of being. They think I can just change for 2 weeks and I'll change back. It's that kind of healing. It's that idea of, oh, if I stop being angry, then God will like me and I'll get healthy. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's the idea of God will forgive my sins, in the sense of I will pretend I'm not angry so God will be pleased with me, but deep down I'm actually going to stay pissed off because I get to do what I want to do. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? And this is where the ego comes in. So fourth plane ancestral stuff, you're really seeing all the different physiological bodies of different egos of people. And as you get more spiritually advanced, Todd will tell you, you'll see people changing. So, you know, in the beginning when someone leaves a life, they'll look very like their physical body. When they died, how they died, the age that they were. And then as they evolve, like after 5, 10, 15 years, depending on how spiritually advanced they are inside this lifetime and afterwards, they might be a different sex, different person, different body shape. Does that make sense? Yeah? So they're able to find them with that stuff. But yeah, all that stuff comes into play on the astral. But really you're looking at understanding that it's a huge space, that all your vows, oaths, obligations, promises come up, that you're dealing with justice, karma, both on the collective and individual levels. And I call it like kind of like the spiritual nursery. You're learning how to share. Spiritually, emotionally, physically, spiritually, how to share space and share molecules, as we call it in theta healing, and how to be in unity consciousness with a lot of different creatures in a lot of different ways, and all the highs and lows of the spectrum with discernment. It's a really beautiful place to go and visit. There's some amazing, amazing realities on the astral planes. Everybody happy with the astral planes? Yeah, you're going to get a lot of different truths coming up on the astral planes and stuff as well. Do not get caught in the emotional candy.
But basically, the third plane also part of the astral plane? So that's okay. So for example, if you say that in order for us to go there, we can like astral projection, but other beings can also like be seen to us.
Yeah.
So it's all like each one is part of another, the other.
Okay, so this is my understanding. Okay, different teachers will teach different things, but this is just my understanding, and it's how I explain it to myself. But to me, there's a difference between biolocation and astral projection. Biolocation is the ability to be able to experience different planes in the same place. So if I'm sitting in meditation and I see an angel standing in front of me, I am experiencing the fifth dimension.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? But I am in the same place. I can't see the whole of the fifth dimension, I can only see that one angel. Does that make sense? Yeah? If I want to actually go to the fifth dimension, I have to use my light body to get there. Right? And then I get to experience the whole thing, which is why some people do it through dreams, some people do it through something else. Does that make sense? Yeah? If I'm experiencing the astral planes, for example, and I'm sitting down, I may be all these amazing books, things like Jupiter Ascending, or what was that one again?
What Dreams May Come.
What Dreams May Come. These are people experiencing the astral plane, sometimes through automatic writing, sometimes through their imagination, but they're doing it while sitting at a desk. Does that make sense? Yeah? When you actually astral project, you're experiencing your astral body. You're having the experience of being more than a physical body. It's like your body's on the bed and you're standing next to it. Does that make sense? And that's a different skill because it's healing on a different level. You actually get to experience dying before you die. You actually get to experience visiting people and being a spirit whilst you're still inside a body. Does that make sense? Yeah? And it's not just something someone's telling you, it's the physical and spiritual experience of it, because no one can tell you it until you experience it. Does that make sense? So yes, they're all together. Yes, the astral planes are here right now and I could tune into them right now and I'm channeling them for you right now, but to actually go there I have to astral project. Just like to get to the fifth, I have to use my light bodies, right? And to get into the mineral kingdoms I have to use my crystal body. Right? Different bodies, different things. If I want to do different elements, I have to use different elementals, but now we're getting kind of advanced because you have fire bodies, water bodies, all sorts. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
almost.
I think that I was also referring, like, for example, aliens, are they like also astral, like when they interact here, on like we see them like from the 3D, but they are from the 4D, or?
Some of them are from the 4D and some of them are actually real. It's like us. Sometimes you can see an ancestor and they're from the 4D, but sometimes there's another person standing next to you.
Oh, okay, so it's also like from the third dimension.
Yeah, it's not and or, it's both.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
because astral and fourth plane are interconnected. It's like where you go in between lives, and it's where aliens go in between lives. So you still have those contracts going on, but you're not necessarily alive. So let's say you're an ancestor and you decide to reincarnate. You're back on the third plane, but you're also an ancestor. So sometimes when you're dealing with somebody, you know them from before, and it's not a past life connection. And people say, oh, she has her grandmother's eyes, and it's actually the grandmother reincarnate. But sometimes it's just the genetic or the DNA. And this is where discernment comes in, which is what you're mastering on the third plane, not the fourth plane, right? Which is the difference between them. What it is, how to tell the difference, how to be able to feel the difference and know the difference. Does that make sense? Yeah? What was your question, darling?
I wanted to ask, when you said to experience the fourth dimension, you have to do the astral projection to travel with your light body.
Yeah.
Is this similar what happens to people when they are on the near-death experience?
Yes, we believe it is.
Okay.
But
that is involuntary, this is voluntary.
And that's the difference. So you're talking about a different level of mastery of free agency and consent. Okay, and because often people have a lot of resentment about death, towards death, about accidents, and a belief that they can only meet God after they're dead, right? And they can only astral project if God tells them they can, right? And they've all got all sorts of beliefs from Christianity and their faith that astral projection is bad, and talking to spirits is bad, and actually experiencing your spiritual body is something that a priest does, not something that you do, and that you'll get punished or go to hell or be burned at the stake. So all that stuff also comes up around the astral. Does Does
work
that?
the other way as well, though, can't it? Because I remember I was meditating a couple of months ago, and I don't know why, but I had this alien come, and I'm not into the fourth dimension at all. It's not my cup of tea at all.
Not into it.
I'm like, so I'm just not into that.
Like you can avoid it. Go on.
A cup of tea. And I was meditating, and I don't know if I was on a good vibe that day, but this alien came through, just spoke to me briefly, and I remember speaking to Todd about it. It was like it told me a name, and I couldn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I googled, and I couldn't find the name, and then through going around the houses, I ended up at Nordic Alien, which I've never heard of. But a Nordic Alien, which I've never heard. I don't know anything about aliens at all, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And I started, because I'm a black woman, I was expecting a black alien. Scandinavian alien. And it definitely existed, but I didn't know that. But he came through really nice guy. And it was like, wow, this is really crazy. But I didn't know I wasn't expecting it. That's not the point I wanted to make, is that just by meditating, I think just being so open that this person was kind enough to pop in and say hi. Literally just like, how you doing, Jen? You alright? And it was lovely.
Yeah, Todd tells this amazing story, and if you guys are very good, I'll get him to come out and tell you about this amazing alien being that he met that was like one of the most amazing experiences he's ever had with beings. But I'll pull him out of there in a minute because I think we're making okay time. But does that make sense? This is the hardest thing to understand. It's not. And this is because we're in duality, it's the hardest thing to understand that it's normally not this or that, it's normally both and. Does that make sense? Yeah? So yes, they are real and you will occasionally meet them, but they will also come through in spiritual form and do all sorts of things in spiritual form as well. They're also much more advanced technologically wise than we are. So some of them are, some of them aren't. Obviously, there's lots of different ones. But yeah, you really want to... the same thing with you want to do with all... You want to kind of work your way through all the gods, through all the alien species and stuff, and just clear your contracts as you go along. I spent a good 6 months after I woke up doing that. Just updating them. You don't want karmic contracts. You want, grace contracts. You don't want things that involve you doing crazy stuff to learn things that don't actually work in the first place. Darling?
Yes, sorry.
Can you come and tell them the amazing alien story?
Which one?
Please.
There is only one.
He's pottering about because he's teasing me.
Can I sit down?
Yes, you can. Do you want the mic?
No, I don't need a mic.
Okay. I have to stand. I don't have a chair. Go on.
Plenty of chairs. Hi, everybody. What are you talking about tonight? Sorry, I've been out all day. And
Remember that one? Not, of course you remember. The one where you...
No, that's not what I meant. What's your talk based on tonight?
We're doing the 7 planes,
Okay.
or the 7 kingdoms of existence. So we're on the 4th, or the astral kingdoms. But I was they were asking about aliens, and I said you have this amazing, because we talked about the scary bits, and they said you have this amazing story about meeting a being that was more advanced than anything you'd ever come across. So I want you to inspire them.
Okay. Okay. Right, so I've been doing out-of-body stuff for almost 13 years now. Started after a near-death experience when I was 5 years old. Almost drowned in a fishing lake. And one of my 2 older brothers pulled me out after I was in there probably more than a minute or so. And I had that classic experience that people talk about, near-death experience, where you have the white light. And I felt myself sort of, this feeling of motion, and then I was standing somewhere else. And I was in this small city, and 5 years old, you don't really question why you're suddenly somewhere else. But, it was so. And there was a tree, and I climbed up the tree, and many things happened. I had suddenly this curly-haired man was sitting in the tree with me, and there's some angry people down below, and he said, the curly-haired guy that was further up the tree than me, he was like, you shouldn't be here. And I thought he meant you know, as in like in the tree in general. And he could read my thoughts, and was really fascinating. And he said, no, not the tree, although this is a sacred tree to these people, so yes, you probably shouldn't be in this tree. But he said, this is not your time, you know, to be here, as in, you know, death. And he sort of explained to me what happened, and he said, I'm going to get you some help. And soon after he said that, I literally was being dragged out of this pond by one of my brothers. So, and it was a really cool experience, and that's where all my experiences started from age 5. I turned 6 just after that, and I started having lucid dreams and then out-of-body experiences from that age. And I didn't know what an out-of-body experience was at that time. I didn't even know what a lucid dream was. I'm just articulating this now as an adult would. I knew the dreams were dreams, and when I started having the second kind of experience, which I couldn't label at the time, they were very different from the dream experiences. The dream experiences, I would always wake up within the dream, like most people do when they have a lucid dream. And I would normally wake up within a dream narrative that was already taking place, which was never really in my bedroom. And if it was in my bedroom, it was never my bedroom as I knew my bedroom to be. And I would never see my physical body. In this other type of experience that started taking place soon after that, I would usually be either awake, lying down still, and I would then have a sensation where I'd feel like I was on a roller coaster, and then I would be standing in the middle of my room and I could see my body. Or I would probably be in deep sleep, and then I had such powerful sensations, I would be woken up into full waking consciousness, and then I'd get that roller coaster type feeling, and I'd be standing in the room. So I knew there was a difference between those two experiences. So this is just to give you a little background on me before I tell alien experiences, because that's getting thrown in the deep end.
Well, we're kind of already deep.
Okay. So for me, it was a very young age when I started having experiences, and they took place up until age 12, and then they completely shut down, and didn't have another proper OBE until I was 35 years old. I'm now 47 years old. So when I was 35, I started practicing to have these experiences. Practiced full on for about a year before something finally happened. And you don't need to practice for a year. I just didn't have any good techniques. I didn't have any guidance from anybody really. I was just using some sound technology. And once I learned techniques and had a bit of guidance, I got out within my first week after that. And I've been practicing for about 13 years now. And I've had some pretty amazing experiences, including with a lot of ET, non-humans. So I think when you're, from the perspective of, let's say, an abduction experience, it's very different from the type of experience you have when you're out of body. When you're out of body, a lot of times you feel a lot more certain about things. They don't seem to have as much influence over you in the out-of-body state as what they do in physical reality. And I think this is because physical reality is a very dense energy field which can be easily manipulated by beings who have their origins in another level of reality where they understand energy mechanics and dynamics in ways that we don't on this level. Whereas when you're out of body, if you've seen the film Limitless, your clarity of mind is sharp. It's like you have an IQ of like 1,000 or more. And things can come to you very clearly depending on the level that you're on. And when you are in the presence of these beings, your fear mind, depending on the level of reality that, the dimension of reality you're on, your fear mind doesn't sort of kick in as much as it can here. And I think when the fear mind gets activated on this level of reality during an experience, like an abduction experience or a meeting, a contact with aliens, then you can be very, very influenced because of your fear mind being activated. So I think it's learning, to really how to hold that space for yourself, how to really, be from that heart-centered place. So over the 13 years, I've had quite a few ET encounters while in the out-of-body state, because to me, a majority of the contact, whether it's non-humans in the form of an angel, non-humans in the form of a gray, non-humans in the form of, you were mentioning reptilians, or any other species, a lot of them are actually visiting this environment from another dimensional level altogether. They may not actually exist within this physical universe. like the biolocation that Sky's talking about, they're materializing form within this reality. And I think the more that you start to get grips with things like lucid dreaming, remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, astral projection, you start to get the puzzle pieces come together and realize that reality is there's probably a relativistic model of reality, in the sense that we're not this on these other levels of reality, as in this type of, purely this type of being, just a human being. And there's a lot to explore. Okay, so just a little bit of groundedness before the alien stuff. So there was a period of about 2 years when I started having contact with one particular species, which I found very disturbing. And no, don't.
Just the good one.
That's what I'm doing, but I have to give you a little. She wants me to just give you, sort of something without context, and it's not going to happen.
I've got context. I gave them context.
I'm not going to give the full disclosure on certain things, darling. It's all right. Just relax and bear with me. Because the being that I met was so vastly different from his
go on.
counterpart, his species.
I'll use my Course in Miracles patience.
Within humanity, we have the very, the best of the best and the worst of the worst, do we not? And we have everything in between. So we're at different stages of development. And I find that that's exactly the same for a lot of other species too. And it was certainly for this species. And in the early days, I kept encountering the worst of their worst. And that was probably a reflection from within me too, because I think this is usually how the universe operates to a large degree. And I felt manipulated a lot, and I didn't like it. And as I started to develop my powers as an out-of-body explorer, I got to a point where I felt a lot more relaxed about being around them, and my fear mind wouldn't get activated so strongly. On this encounter that Sky is referring to, I came out of my body after a couple of years of what I felt was, this serious manipulation, which I didn't like with this one particular species. I came out of my body, and I wanted to visit what I would refer to as the soul plane. That's, probably, plane 6 in what Sky's referring to, maybe plane 5. Sometimes there's different labels for stuff depending on the school of thought that you're coming from. And I wanted to visit the soul plane. I wanted to be able to be in the energy of my true self, that highest form of me. And I was moving, I could feel myself moving through different layers of reality. And then suddenly the brakes got put on, and I was sort of in this void state. There was no form. And then suddenly in my mind, there was the reality that there was someone else there. I could feel the energy. And then suddenly the form of this other being. And it was this same species. And it freaked me out straight away, because I knew I've always had that contact with that species, and it was always negative. And I then made the command to move back to my physical body, to shift my awareness back to my body. And it was a he. He sort of opened his energy field, and he said, wait, I'm not here to hurt you. And the energy was probably the strongest I'd felt of any being up until that time. And that was a good few years into this practice. And I'd met a lot of incredible beings, both in human form and in other sort of non-human forms. And he said, just, wait, read me. Read me as in feel my energy, feel my truth. And as I was sort of tapping into his energy, I could feel that, his intent was, a loving intent. And I could actually start to tap into his life, his vibrational sort of existence. And I could see that he had many human lives previous to taking form in this new civilization with this new species. And he graduated what we would call the human system. And so, he'd had 1,000+ lifetimes here across many dimensions of reality as a human. And after his soul withdrew the energy from this system, went looking for other systems to learn from, found this other system, and took form within that system and started to advance through them, through the ranks in that system, learning as he went. And this is how we learn. And so anyhow, so he was literally what I would call in the vanguard of his civilization. He was about to graduate that reality. So his energy was profound, to say the least. And he was very powerful, a very creative being. And he said to me, you're a teacher on your level of reality. And I'd like to show you, I'd like to demonstrate to you your full potential as a human being. And I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I'd like that. And he literally showed me how you could create, let's call simulations. So a simulated reality, which is as physically real as this reality. Because ultimately, in his sort of words, this is a sort of a mental construct. All reality takes place within the actual reality of consciousness. So therefore, there is no physical basis to reality. There's no base reality that is physical, and everything else is non-physical, mental as such. Everything is a mental reality, or non-physical reality, with the idea of physicality. Anyhow, there's a lot to it, so I'll get to the point now. So he literally created this world where he then took my form, put into this what was like a human simulated world. And he said, what I want to have happen here is I want to raise you from a baby up to an adult as an artist and have mentors for you. And all this was taking place within, what seemed minutes. Like if somebody just sort of fast forward a video and, and I'm growing up, and I have all of these experiences being embedded into my consciousness because they were real. And got to the point where I was the consciousness of this, really advanced artisan on this holographic world. And he then pulled my conscious awareness out of it, and I was back with him again. And he said, I wanted to give you an example. He said, if I had to give you the example of 0 to 10 on the scale of full potential as a human being, he took me up to around a 6, 10 being the highest, sort of realization as a human. And he said, where I took you to, the point I just took you to, Michelangelo, individuals like that, that's where they left off within that incarnation. The potential was to experience much more. And it was really quite amazing. Then he said, I'd like to run through your life, the life that you're going through now. And I'd like to show you a few offshoots of potential if you were to choose to activate those, on your level of reality. I was like, yeah, please, show me my future.
Pretty please.
And again, he inserted me back into this holographic world, into a body, and I was, again, from a baby all the way up, to adulthood. And then got to a point where I'd not experienced before. This experience was years ago now. And he said, so I'm now going through this, and it feels like I'm going on that dial up from 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 10, 3, 4. Got to about a 4 and a 5, and I started getting really emotional, really uncomfortable, because it was that not worthy stuff that was kicking in. I'm not enough. And I asked him to pull me out. So he did. He pulled me out, and he said, why did you ask me to stop? And I said, because I really didn't feel like that was me. I felt, like that's just, I can't be that. And he said, of course you can. He said, all humans on your level of reality have that potential. You have your shadow stuff. He didn't use the word shadow, but that's what he was referring to. And that healing work to do. And he left me with a lot of stuff that he said basically, like downloads. And he said, take your time over the next few weeks. Take it slowly with this material. And it was a really powerful experience. And I think, Sky's probably already referred to it. We see the best of humanity all the time. We see the worst of humanity all the time. Same goes with a lot of other species out there. And it's learning to get to that point to where we've developed enough to where we can start taking that deeper journey where we're not always in judgment or blame, that we're taking full responsibility for ourselves. To the point of something showing up in your life, it showed up because it's for you to take responsibility for it, whether it's a thought, feeling, or an actual event. So, yeah, there's some fun alien stuff.
Give him some fun. See, I told you. So there's a lot of, I really wouldn't let this, there's a lot of, this is what I mean, this is where not just interspecies discrimination, but interplane discrimination and spiritual superiority kicks in. Don't go to the astral planes, it's bad, terrible things will happen to you. There are entities and lower vibrations there. Yes, that's someone's fear talking. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yes, of course there are, but there are bacteria here and illnesses here and war here. That doesn't mean life isn't worth it. Does that make sense? And your abilities will develop. What I would say is in the beginning, don't go and visit the lower planes. You know, if you want to come to the planet for the first time, you don't really want to be in the worst area of the worst city, in the deepest poverty. Does that make sense? You normally graduate to that when you're at a higher level of emotional resilience. But when you've had no experience of a plane whatsoever, you want to start really gentle. Does that make sense to somebody? Yeah? So just be really easy with yourself. Also, if you feel yourself getting pulled into the astral planes already, whether it's through alien stuff or entity stuff or ancestral stuff or shamanic stuff or because someone's passed over, you're being called to sort out your fourth plane stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah? So the longer you put it off, the longer it's going to sit there and the more stuff is going to build in that area. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? And you can't really get up to the higher planes if you're still stuck in the drama of this fourth plane stuff. So fourth plane is like this, like what we were talking about, it's this emotional collective consciousness drama. And third plane is like just human emotion. You know, fourth plane is more like spiritual morality and collective morality and consent. Yeah? But you're still dealing with higher levels of emotional integrity, responsibility, and truth. Does that make sense? Deeper levels of relationship. Fifth plane is spiritual emotions and spiritual intelligence. Yeah? So it's almost like, even if you think about the chakras, base chakra, sacral chakra, solar plexus chakra, are different degrees of emotional intelligence, different degrees of emotional mastery. Heart chakra, throat chakra, you're talking, spiritual mastery, but that first level of collective consciousness, how you relate to other people, not just to yourself. Does that make sense? And then as you move up into the fifth and sixth planes, you're talking about literally spiritual emotional mastery. Yeah, you're actually in that spiritual realms, which is all the confusion about how do you actually create a relationship with Creator. You know, are you, when you're one with Creator, when you're yourself, this separation and non-separation. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Okay, so I'll keep going. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on tonight. So fifth kingdom is my favorite. Yay! Took a while getting here. I'm really into angels. But you'll find that the fifth kingdoms are as vast as the fourth planes, but they're full of heavens and hells. Okay, which is why you find the angels and demons there. Okay, most mythologies have their angels, have their demons as being fallen angels. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So they're learning through the polarity of the universe. It's like the end of polarity. So in the lower levels of the fifth kingdom, you still have this heaven-hell type scenario. As you start to move up into the higher levels of the fifth dimension, you move into androgynous beings. They've transcended duality, they've transcended sexuality, they're moving into oneness. That's why a lot of Indian gods and Hindu gods have both sexualities or one, because they're showing that unity and the end of dualism. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? You'll find all the angels up there. You'll find like demonic energies up there. You'll find all the ascended masters there. You'll find the heavens and the hells. You'll also find incredible healing temples in different modalities. And this is where the same way that the third and fourth planes are interconnected, the fifth and sixth planes are interconnected. So you'll find a lot of sacred geometric shapes, a lot of sound, a lot like angels sing all the time, right? Choirs of angels. Does that make sense to everybody? And you'll find that there's hierarchies of different, like there's different ascended masters that are in charge of the different colors on the sixth plane. There's different angels that are in charge of the elements, of like the cherubs are in charge of the constellations and all the stars inside the universe. And this is why they're supposed to be the angels of love, because it's star-crossed lovers. right? It's the stars that are aligning your romantic interactions in theory when they came up with these principles. You also have the dominions and the thrones. So you're looking at governing forces, things like gravity, things like time and space are all governed by the dominions. Things like the nature kingdoms are all governed by the principalities. Does that make sense? You see how they're all interconnected? Yeah? Demonic energies are the destructive gods or the forces of destruction. In order for a new forest to grow, there has to be a fire. Does that make sense? Yeah? In order for the new generation to come in, the old generation has to pass away. So there's the forces of destruction and the forces of life. Does that resonate with everybody? And these forces are all, in the divine aspect of these forces are all on the fifth plane. So the same way that some of the angels are in charge of the wellness and the healing of the planet, some of the angels are in charge of the disease and the famine and the war and the conflict and the destruction. Does that make sense? Hence, angels of the light and angels of the darkness. Yeah? So when working with angels, always say angels of the light. Right? Unless there's a pattern in your life you want to destroy, and then guess what? You want to bring in the angels that are used to destroying things. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? It's just you get used to it. It's the same thing working with gods and goddesses. There are goddesses of destruction and goddesses of creation. And it's working with them for what their role is. Does that resonate with everybody? And it's getting into this rhythm, this cycle of life and death. There's this beautiful passage inside the Tibetan Book of the Dead that says that we get 1,000 opportunities to connect with death in every moment of life. Every time a wave crashes on the shore, every time our heart beats, every time we breathe out and our breath stops. If someone passes away, there's 1,000 moments where we get to see death and make peace with death and destruction before it comes. Does that make sense? So I remember when my grandmother passed away, I was around 20 years old, 22 years old, because right before I met Todd. And I started working with Angel of Death for the first time. Before then, I was really scared of that energy. Kind of in the same way that Todd was scared of the energy of like the aliens that were causing him problems. I was scared of the energy of the angels that I saw around people who were not well. Does that make sense? And here was this angel pretty much showing me how the same way that a midwife carries a baby into this world, he was carrying people over into the afterlife. Does that make sense? Yeah. And how even when they died, they weren't alone. The same way as when they were born, they weren't alone. And how it was an important job. And how people talk about death stalking people in a kind of a creepy way, and him explaining that death was omnipresent in a you will never be alone way. That no one on this planet has ever died alone, because he's been there for every single death. Does that make sense? Yep. And the angel of death is also known as Archangel Azrael. Very yellow, very yellow vanilla-y color, almost white. There's so many others. And particularly, for example, let's say you're working with the human body, with Archangel Raphael. He will work with his divine physicians and with his band of mercy. And you'll see him creating forces in the body. For example, the immune system, which will use the forces of destruction to destroy a disease. Does that make sense? So there's nothing wrong with working with the angels of destruction and the angels of creation, but there's a balance. Right? And most times people either go too into the light or too into the darkness, when really you have to be working with both. Now, I'm not arrogant. I know that each one of these topics, each one of these levels is a lifetime in and of itself. But there's something very powerful to be said about having a general knowledge as well as being an expert. Does that make sense? And at the moment in spirituality, we have too many experts and not enough people that know how everything fits together. We have no general knowledge of the spiritual world and how they interact and how they're interconnected and how they have a symbiotic relationship and how they relate to one another. So there's a lot of fear of the different levels and the different planes and a lot of weird superiority stuff coming up. Does that make sense? Yeah? So, and angels and masters, you can, and heavens and stuff, you can use it to charge energy. So for example, in the beginning, I didn't understand how to heal people. And I was really scared and I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember my angels saying, it's fine, just watch. You witness, we'll do it. Does that make sense? Yeah, and that's one of the biggest beliefs in theta healing, is that you are the witness and creator is the healer, or that the angels are the healer. And that's one of the biggest things that stops you from ending up manifesting things like cancer or illness or disease, because you're not absorbing people's energies directly. Does that make sense? Yeah. And you're also healing all the wounds of those lifetimes where you thought that that healing was never happening, that God wasn't there, that someone died alone. I was so angry at God because I thought he'd let people die on their own or in deep suffering. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And being explained things, like when you really start working with, because some of the angels of karma, the lords of karma, because there's a mix of ascended masters and angels on the board of karma, you know, they will specifically talk to you about the laws of cause and effect, and they will show you collective karma, individual karma, what's happening, what's going on. They'll explain things in a way that brings such clarity. I had a client this week who was saying to me, I'm really confused because all these people, because of all these bombings and all these wars, telling me that we need this to learn and we created this for a reason. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And because I've had these deep conversations with beings and understand different things, you know, because you've developed the discernment, right, to know which parts are true and which parts are not true, right? Because yes, we did create it for a reason and we did create it to learn, but no, that's not the only way we could have learned those lessons, and it's also not the highest way that we could do it or the best way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, we're learning through this. 100% true. The fact that we needed to create it to learn this, not true. Does that make sense? Yeah? And then also, and it's, which is an even deeper level, like, but then God created this, God made this happen so we would learn lessons. No, God did not create this so you would learn lessons. We created it because we thought it was the only way to learn. The fact that the Holy Spirit then steps in and brings miracles out of every situation, no matter how dark, that's the nature of the Holy Spirit. Does that make sense? No matter how much you fuck up, the universe knows that to teach is to demonstrate. So it will only ever demonstrate mercy, patience, kindness, compassion, and integrity in that moment. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because it was the lack of those things that created that situation in the first place. But that's not it giving you consent to carry on learning through this for another 30,000 years. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. But without those conversations, it's so easy to get confused. Does that resonate with everyone? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And also to give responsibility over to beings that have nothing to do with what it is that we're doing or why we're doing it, right? And feeling like God's abandoned those people or those things that didn't happen. So you understand responsibility on an individual level, on a collective level, on a spiritual level, and on the different spiritual levels, because something can be coming from spirit. Oh, there's water in there if you want some. There's water, so something can be coming from spirit, but it can be coming from the 4th plane, the 5th plane, or the 6th plane. Does that make sense? Mm. Or the 7th plane. And you start to develop the discernment of, yes, what that person said is true. It is coming from spirit. But which spirit is it? Someone's saying, oh, this is coming from God. Which God is it? Does that make sense? Mm. You start to ask those deeper questions. Because if it's coming from a loving God, congratulations. If it's coming from the God that wants you to cut open, the throat of a cow and sacrifice its blood to it, not so great. Does that resonate with everyone? Yeah. Yeah, different beliefs, different gods, different spiritual discriminations. So yeah, all the gods also live on here. So all of the Viking gods, all of the Greek gods, all of the Roman gods, all of the gods and goddesses. Dorian Virtue has an amazing gods and goddesses card deck. There's also a really good book called The Gods in Every Man by, I can't remember her name now. I know her first name is Shania, but I can't remember the rest of it. The gods in every man and the goddesses in every woman, that goes into these collective, giant, cultural, spiritual archetypes. Does that make sense? Because we don't just have subconscious archetypes in the sense of mother, father, brother, sister, professional worker, rescuer, victim, persecutor. We also have divine archetypes, and these show up inside the 5th plane of existence to be resolved. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. Sometimes.
Do they go to Halloween parties dressed as each other?
I'd say angels kind of go in between every faith and every religion that there is. Gods are more picky, and ascended masters are also more picky. Because there's still this spiritual superiority thing going on. My religion's better than your religion. Still. Yeah. Gods. And not all gods are like Buddha. right? There's angels and there's like the Buddha peaceful type gods, which they spent generations learning about peace, and the whole focus of their religion was about peace. If you think about Roman gods and Viking gods, they're gods of war. Do you know what I mean? So they don't all want to hang out together. It's like there are people you know and people that are your friends.
It's not a peace and love up there, basically.
Yeah. Well, this is why in Hindu mythology, in Greek mythology, in Viking mythology, there's wars between the gods. Does that make sense? And there's different levels to the fifth
I
plane.
didn't know whether that was a human projection
Nope.
on the fifth kingdom, or whether that was the truth of the fifth kingdom.
It's both.
It's both, yeah.
Because the higher levels of the fifth kingdom, right before you go into the sixth kingdom, is exactly that this stuff doesn't exist and it all is unity and coexists. But on the fifth plane, exactly because it's a mirror of what's going on inside humanity, it's also a mirror of what's happening inside the gods. It's a symbiotic relationship. They're still growing, so our divine energy is still growing and still developing and evolving.
So have ascended masters mastered, what have they mastered, in fact? Virtues.
They've mastered a lot of virtues. On average, an ascended master on average has mastered between 300 and 400 virtues.
Wow.
Out of the whole, I think there's around 12,000. But it's a mastery of one system. So ascended masters for our world have mastered the earth plane system. Does that make sense? There are many other systems. And you don't have to achieve complete mastery across the board. So you can achieve intellectual mastery or emotional mastery. Kuan Yin is an emotional master. And then there are, like, for example, Thor is like a war master. But there's different kinds of mastery. Does that make sense? But if you've achieved an in-depth level of mastery, there are whole books called The Art of War.
Sure.
Yeah? So when you've achieved a deep enough level of mastery that you've transcended it in all those different levels and you made peace with it, ironically, right? Finding peace through war, which is a lot of what people are still trying to do down here, then you're still a god, if that makes sense. When you
read into the mythology properly, gods of war usually are actually all about strategizing for peace, ultimately. It's taking them at face value, it sees them only as warmongers.
Well, it's a belief that we have that you can only find truth through conflict. And that you have to fight, and it's also a belief that they have that it's a confusion about the law of ultimate truth. And when we did the laws, we talked about some truths can be bent, others can be broken, and some can't. And the ones that can't be bent or broken are called ultimate truths. And the law of truth is one of those laws. Now, when they can't be bent or broken, what happens is, it's like when I said to you in a room and you're trying to figure out a maths equation, you're bashing your head off the wall, you're not getting any closer to figuring it out. A lot of people are like that with the law of truth. So they're like, I'm right, no, I'm right. And really what they're saying is, this is true, no, this is true. And you have these opposing, very strong ideas, because the truth, everyone thinks they know it, right? And everyone thinks it's theirs. And they're learning you can't possess the truth. And that there isn't one truth, there is a spectrum of truths. And they're learning about the marriage of different truths and how truths collaborate with one another. But it's on an unconscious level. And that's what you're dealing with. When you're at a God level or divinity level, you're dealing with ultimate truths, and you're dealing with things like walking on water. You're dealing with things you've mastered the elements. They can shift between dimensions, they can shape shift, they can create miracles instantly. They're dealing with a deeper, much deeper level of mastery. They're not trying to bend laws like time and space like we are, or create miracles on this planet. That's already done. They're learning how to master ultimate truths. So it's a different level of understanding. It's still a lot more than we've mastered, but it's not complete. So they're not still at seventh plane energy. Does that make sense? Yeah? Is that okay? Go on. I saw you had a question.
I'm wondering, did that alien type Todd met, was he an ascended master? Like at the end?
For a human, yeah.
The Earth.
In two different systems, he said.
Yeah.
Not just the human
Okay,
one, the
yeah.
alien one as well.
He or she was it, whatever, was an ascended master.
Yeah.
And then it moved on to the next.
Yep.
Okay.
Totally. And there are some ascended masters systems where all the work is done anonymously. It's actually one of the principles of Buddhism that you do all the work anonymously. You never let anyone know that you're an ascended master, so there's no fame and there's nothing to get back. So a lot of ascended masters, you'll never know who they are. and you'll never know what they're doing because the principle is they're working anonymously. Yeah?
Like in Zen.
Yeah. They're mastering devotion and benevolence. Other ultimate truths. Okay, but that's how it works. And yeah, you can be an ascended master in multiple systems. One of my friends once said to me, she only channels ascended masters, and she was like, I like channeling ascended masters because they've all been human, and angels haven't been human. And I was like, haven't you met Metatron? And this is what I mean by, even on that level, there's still these different discriminations. Yeah. So this is what I mean by general knowledge is important, because the more information we spread, there's more than you guys hearing this information in this room. There's other beings on different levels. Okay? And this is also why, and I tell you guys, when I recommend people book sessions with me, I say book 4, because you're talking about working the stuff out on all the 4 levels of belief. And 4 hours is nothing. Does that make sense? It is nothing. And people often say, in this lifetime, I've spent over, now it's 10 years, I think I've spent over 15,000 hours healing. Right? And that's because I didn't have a system as advanced as the one I'm using right now, or the ones I've been exposed to right now. But that's what I mean by there's this there's this mentality that there's something wrong with you if you can't instantly figure stuff out. Does that make sense? And there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with your healer. You'll figure a lot out. You might learn 100 lessons that would have taken you 5 lifetimes to figure out in 1 hour. Does that make sense? Yeah? But it's just getting the human mind around it. And giving yourself the time to do it. Because I also deal with a lot of healers who really struggle with self-healing because they don't give themselves the time. If they do things to themselves they would never do with a client in a million years. Does that make sense? So if you don't have that level of integrity with yourself, until you've mastered it, just don't do it by yourself. Does that make sense? Otherwise you're kind of doing a sort of spiritual abuse on yourself. It's like, I should be able to figure out by myself, and because I can't, I'm going to force myself to stay here and do it. It's a form of emotional and spiritual violence. Yeah, it's not okay. If you need help, ask for help. They will get to a point where you will be comfortable on your own and you'll be comfortable with help. I love doing sessions with my teacher and getting help, but I'm very capable of sitting down and doing 2 or 3 hours back to back of healing work on myself. Does that make sense? But I know when I've hit a wall, and I know when I need help. I know how to ask for it. Does that resonate with everyone? Yeah? So it's really, really important. It's not a little bit important. Okay. So 6th kingdom. And this is with all the gongs and the sounds and the colors that comes in. You're dealing with real brain candy here. People that are, oh my God, there's so much brain candy. You could read libraries and libraries and libraries, because the whole of the Akashic Records is up here. You could spend all of your time, lifetime studying music, lifetime studying colors and artists, lifetime studying frequency. Lifetimes mastering laws, lifetimes mastering numerology, lifetimes getting the sacred geometric shapes, lifetimes figuring out astrology, lifetimes figuring out orbits. It's insane the amount of brain candy up here. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah? This is why you'll find 2 kinds of people often gravitate. You'll know someone's 6th plane if they have to move to the house number 66. Okay? This amount of informational overwhelm normally leads to a little bit of OCD. Okay, because it's too much information, so it feels out of control. So the person will latch on to the modality that feels the safest to them and become very focused on that modality. Does that make sense? Because in order to learn anything on this plane, you have to master focus.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah? Particularly with the law of attraction, which is under the laws, also on this plane, right? You have to be able to focus on it to the exclusion of everything else. Otherwise, you get distracted. Yeah. Right? So this plane is like distraction central. A lot of people who come back through disability, also who are very advanced, doctors, scientists, are very connected to this kingdom. Things like dyslexia, things like autism, things like Asperger's, savants, when they drop a box and they can count all the matches. They have a natural connection to the 6th plane. Does that make sense? And a deep intuitive mastery of the intellectual laws of the universe, and absolutely no understanding of the emotional laws. Does that make sense? Yeah? So And they really don't like the emotional laws. They've got real beliefs about, it's like emotional racism. It's like emotions shouldn't exist, emotions are useless, emotions are a waste of time, emotions are dangerous, emotions are irrational, cancel, clear, delete. They have a real fear of emotion. It's not a small amount of fear. So sometimes they try and force themselves to learn emotion by placing themselves in a situation where they have to rely on other people, where they only have emotion to connect and communicate with. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's not the best way, it's not the only way, but if you've avoided it for 100,000 lifetimes, you start to get impatient with yourself. Okay? And you're not so scared of doing things that are a bit out of this. But the few children that I've worked with and healed and seen healings with, or that actually cancel, clear, delete, that they experience spontaneous remission, just to make the legal people happy. When I worked with them with autism, with Asperger's or other illnesses, they had very strong connections to the sixth plane. Does that make sense? Yeah? And they did not know how to learn emotion without force. They had to force themselves. That's how scared they were of emotions. Emotions terrified them. When I worked with autistic kids that were like that, they just would scream or freak out if there was an emotion they couldn't recognize in the room. Just in the human realm, not talking about all the other realms, there are 3,000 emotions just in the English language. Every language has its own set of emotions too. Right? Because it creates a different set of neural pathways inside the brain. So it's really overwhelming for them, especially having to go back to the beginning. It's not a small amount of fear, and I'm not making light. Does that make sense? Yeah? They also have a belief that they're very enlightened and they're here to teach other people lessons. Right? So so a lot of people tune in to like people who are, disabled. They're like, they're a really high vibration. Damn right they are. They're also really stubborn. And they also think this is the only way to learn. Does that make sense? Yeah? And you can see it. I used to work in schools where literally there was schools for just disabled children. Only disabled kids could go. And from Down syndrome to autism to syndromes that aren't even properly diagnosed, the same stubbornness and determination abounds. There is a deep respect, deep humility, deep understanding of life. The amount of wisdom in those places is insane. The amount of miracles you'll see is insane. Things that aren't supposed to happen just happen, because it's like you're in a room of like a million masters of the physical laws of the universe, right? It's just the emotional laws really stump them. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you're dealing with gently releasing the shock and trauma of having been tortured emotionally, and teaching them what emotions are, how they're useful, what they can learn through them, that they do have a purpose beyond what they think they are. And you have to realize that there are people who were put into spiritual lifetime after spiritual lifetime at the age of 1-year-old, 2-year-old, especially if you look at monk dynasties or Roman dynasties. They found these people in between incarnations. They were taken from their mothers at 1 or 2 years old. They had no time to develop emotional mastery of anything before someone was testing them and asking them for stuff and getting them to do readings and finding things. And does that make sense? They were put straight into spiritual training, and they had lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of this. So sometimes they have a real emotional deficit. Does that make sense? And a real disconnection also commonly from feminine energy, because there were thousands of years on this planet where women weren't allowed to be spiritual. Women had no spiritual ability, no spiritual understanding according to religions. Does that make sense? So it's very prevalent in some of their DNA because it's still held on a spiritual level. All their gifts are connected with this. It's one of the rules they were taught. Does that make sense? And even their mastery of some specific things was based upon their vows of celibacy, their vows of emotional discipline, their ability to be able to focus on something without connection to anything else. So it's a very big shift in direction. It's a very big shift in growth. Does that, not all disabled people are the same. I'm not saying that they are, just so that's clear. But the vast majority of people that I've worked with, and I had a lot of experience, it was connected with this. Obviously, there's also past life trauma, there's genetic issues that can arise, there's cultural karma with poisons that people are given potentially through vaccinations or with things that come inside the food or inside the earth that can also be an issue. But this is discernment, you can tune in. But as applied to the sixth plane, when it comes to people who are experiencing, dyslexia, autism, always look for sixth plane issues. Does that make sense? Yeah, over intellectualization. my teacher calls, she makes me laugh because she always says, you know, rationalizing splits up into rational lies. Right? Lies you tell yourself to create reason. Right? When you can't handle a specific emotion. Right? So it's all about developing the spiritual and emotional musculature. So this is from the Course in Miracles, and this is how I teach this, and the guys that come here often, they know this already. But basically, when most people don't understand that the same way that you develop physical musculature, you develop physical musculature. Okay? So forgiveness is a spiritual muscle, and just like if you want to have a beautiful body, you have to exercise it regularly. If you want to have a beautiful spiritual body, you have to develop spiritual and emotional musculature. Does that make sense? Right? This is why all the religions of the world advocate a spiritual practice. Whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's yoga, it's a practice. It's not just a thought process. Does that make sense? Yeah? Now, the more you practice, the more you can, just like the more I go to the gym and I lift weights, the heavier the weight I can lift. Okay? Now, that doesn't happen overnight. So if I've been going to the gym for 2 years, I can walk in and might be able to lift 70 kilograms, 100 kilograms, right? If I've been practicing for a week and I walk in and I try to lift that level of weight, I'm going to hurt myself. Does that make sense to everybody? And it makes perfect sense. Now, spiritual muscles and emotional muscles are invisible. Okay, but it's the same deal. So depending on the amount of hatred or anger in a space, it's going to take a different amount of energy to be able to transform it. Does that make sense? Yeah? Depending on the amount of darkness, I need a different level of light. Right, in this room it's relatively easy to light, but if I try and take that light down to the bottom of the darkest part of the ocean, I'm in trouble. Right, it's not even going to make it through the bottom layer. Right? So it's the same thing that the different darknesses require different levels of light. Right? And the virtues are what allow you to hold that light. They're like the light bulb for the light inside that lamp. They're container, right? And the more virtues you have, the more wattage you can hold. Does that make sense? Yeah, everybody with me? So, and when it comes to developing spiritual musculature, if someone's really deeply triggered you or done, let's say someone started a war, for example, or someone's burnt down a building, that's a different level of spiritual musculature than someone's eating your sandwich. Does that make sense? Yeah, and sometimes people get dropped into situations, whether it's, you know, concentration camps, whether it's, you know, a bullying, whether it's abuse, and they haven't developed the emotional musculature, and it's almost like they get crushed by their own spiritual beliefs because their doubt eats them alive. They're like, I've read about this, why isn't forgiveness working? And it's exactly like Alcoholics Anonymous, it works if you work it. Okay, if you've developed the spiritual musculature, it will work. If you haven't, you have to rely on a force bigger than yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah? And this is where the energy of Creator or the energy of God, you join your mind with the mind of God and the miracles start to happen until you develop enough musculature of your own. Does that make sense? Where you're always connected, where you always have that light, where you start to develop into becoming gods and angels and then coming up into those realms. Does that make sense? Yeah? And this is why the yogis can walk on water, why they can just bend spoons. Why? Because they're already developing this mastery over the first plane and second plane and third planes. Does that make sense? Yeah, they're not evolved enough to completely go away altogether, but they're evolved enough to have developed mastery over the first 4 levels of existence. They don't get stuck in the bardo state anymore. They don't get stuck in the astral. They go straight up to the 5th plane, but they're still dealing with things about superiority and war and conflict. That's why you still get religious wars and religious people being like, yeah, let's go and kill all those people. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so does everybody understand the 6th kingdom, where it comes from? Yeah? In theta healing, we call it the sticky green substance.
It's delicious.
She likes to eat it, this Jenna. It's like a jelly, it's like a membrane on the outside of a cell, because the laws regulate the frequencies of all the other planes of existence. Right? The same way that minerals regulate and build, the laws regulate and build the universe. Does that make sense? Minerals regulate and build physical matter, the laws regulate and build the different levels of the universe. So it creates this sticky, a jelly type substance. It's a green color, and you push through that to get to the 7th plane, which is the energy of Creator of all that is. So so this plane really contains only unconditional love. A lot of people who go there don't come back. Okay, through theta healing, that's not really an issue, but if you spontaneously go there through spiritual awakening, like Eckhart Tolle or whatever, that's when you get things like walk-ins and stuff happening. Does that make sense?
Come again?
Okay, so a walk-in is when one spirit leaves the body doesn't die, and a new spirit walks in and takes over. Right? So, for example, Eckhart Tolle was like a really amazing lecturer at German university, and then one day he had a spiritual awakening. He kind of got all the way up to the enlightened levels of the seventh plane. He walked away from his job and he just sat in a park for 3 years. And then when he came back, he was a spiritual teacher, and he didn't even recognize his old name. Does that make sense? He had to relearn what a wife was, what he was, what humans were, what he was there to do, all that stuff from scratch. Right? Also known as a walk-in. Okay? So if someone decides that they don't want this vessel, and it's a perfectly good and healthy vessel, and a being wants to come in and teach through it, then it can and it will. Does that make sense? Yeah?
There were comments as well.
Sorry? Coma. Sometimes. Sometimes. But it depends, because comas can really be bardo and fourth plane state. But you can also get walk-ins from that, and that tends to be like when sometimes that happens, like they wake up and they don't remember anyone or anything. And that can be one of two things. That can be that they don't want to remember because whatever happened was so traumatic before they decided to go into a coma, and the other is it's a completely different person inside their body. It can also happen with people, and it doesn't always happen. Okay, so nothing I say in this lecture is supposed to be used to bully, intimidate, discriminate against, try and fix anybody. Okay, just so that goes out when this is aired on YouTube, because then I can't control who sees it. Okay, it's not supposed to be used for someone to be like, oh, someone's homosexual because they had this trauma in other life, or oh, someone wanted to change their sex because of this or that. Okay, this is not about spiritually analyzing people. This is just about developing a more general understanding of everything. Does that make sense? So for example, like sometimes with walk-ins, the being that walks in will be androgynous, so they won't associate with a sexuality, or they'll want to change sexuality. And sometimes they won't, either they'll really tell you, they're like, I'm not part of this family, I have no idea who the hell these people are. Also can happen through drug experiences. Like really crazy states with different kinds of drugs, particularly things like heroin or opium, and drugs that completely knock you out of your body. It can also happen because sometimes, haven't you heard people who say, I don't want to come back? Right, they don't want to come back. So someone else comes back instead. Pardon?
Why don't they die?
They do die. Their body doesn't die. You are not your body. So it's
The spirit goes,
And someone
the
else
soul,
comes in.
different spirit comes, the soul remains.
the body's not the soul.
Yes, but if they are in the astral,
Yep.
then they don't die. They experience.
Nobody ever dies, and nobody's ever born. That's the law of illusion.
So they don't want to suffering from being the third dimension.
Yep.
Okay.
But you can, it doesn't really work that way. Because you can kind of, you don't, in A Course in Miracles it says, right, that you don't have a choice about what the curriculum is. You only have a choice about what class you take at what time. So you can take a class, decide it's too advanced, I can't keep up, it's not good for me, and come back to it later on. Does that make sense? And there's no danger in that, there's no harm in that. But you avoid the class for long enough and you're going to have to go in. Right? Like I was saying to you about the sixth plane, and potentially people who've never avoided emotions forever, and then one day, you know, it's time to face the music. They have to learn what emotions are and how to deal with them and how to master them, so they can be complete, not as a form of punishment, but so they can experience the fullness of themselves. Right? But the same way that to me, the idea of mastering mathematics terrifies me. Right? The boredom, the frustration, the craziness, that's the same thing they experience when you think about emotions. But I haven't found freedom through that modality yet, and they haven't found freedom through emotions yet. So we have infinite things to teach each other. Does that make sense? Yeah? But it's just as scary depending on where you are. Right? For a person who's mastered emotions, being locked in a room with a bunch of rational people drives you bonkers. You know, that's why you don't find many spiritual people in universities, because we all are like, Jesus, I can't cope with this. If you look at your face when I say that, it's like, no, please don't make me. You know? It's that level of contempt, right, that needs to be transformed, because it's not true and it's not for our highest and best good, and we have it for each other on an unconscious level. But yeah, you get a lot of walk-ins and stuff on this level because of the level of bliss. You don't lose yourself on this level, but your body does become healed in the presence of it. Because everything is reminded of its divine order. Does that make sense? And of its divine nature. You can get stuck on any of the different levels and think you're in 7th plane as well. So you know that if you're giving someone healing and you're getting drained of energy, you're not in 7th plane. Does that make sense? And then you have to go away and work on your stuff. You know that if you're, sitting there angry with God, that you're still on the 5th plane and you haven't made the 6th plane yet. Okay? Because you're still working out different issues to be resolved or sorted out. So from this plane of existence, you can bend the different laws, access all the different planes, and work with them, transcending the law of cause and effect, through the law of grace, through the law of compassion, and you can achieve instant healings and instant miracles because you're not bound by the laws of time and space, which are the laws which regulate the other planes of existence. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So it's a very powerful level to work from. It heals things quickly, it heals things effectively. So from here you can mend a broken soul, you can mend a broken heart. But you're witnessing Creator healing it. You're watching it being done around you. You can also completely rewrite soul contracts and things like that from the 5th plane, as well as from the 6th plane of 7th plane of existence. But yeah, it's a very, very, very blissed out state. People have been in there for weeks. When Buddhist masters and stuff find it, have you guys heard the stories of people going into the caves to find enlightenment and they never come back? Because when they find it, the release of bliss is so strong, they're just gone. Right? It does exist, it is there. And you can also, like with what we're doing right now, access it through biolocation instead of actually creating a vessel to journey there. You can and you will, if you're like me, get up there a few times and be told this is not what you're supposed to be doing, please get back down there. Stop trying to escape the system. You're meant to be, loving the system. You'll probably, if you're a spiritual master, you'll probably have had a few of those lifetimes where you're like, really? I just spent like this whole lifetime trying to get up here, now you're telling me to get back down. Because that's when you're mastering real service and you're mastering love and joy of being, and because you want to, not because someone's making you. Does that make sense? Yeah? But yeah, 7th plane is the plane through which you access all the other planes, through which the downloads come from, through which you can really feel unity consciousness with any other human being on the planet, through which the miracles come from. It's really, really fast. It's really, really beautiful. You'll be amazed at how quickly people heal. Like when I'm doing sessions with people, like the possibilities are limitless because you're working through something that's been around since before you were born and will be around after you're dead, and who's been with this person through all their incarnations and all these different lifetimes, and it knows what the hell it's doing. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it's a very, very powerful energy to work with. It took me ages. I worked with angels for 8 years before I started working with Creator. I've been working with Creator for 3 years now. I still work with my angels, but it's a different energy. And I had a lot of God healing to do before I could work with Creator. But it makes sense that angels are sent by Creator, right? Duh, messengers of Creator. But it took me a while to figure out. But that's us at the 7th plane. So I'll let you guys take a 5-minute break and then get back here and we'll do some channeling. I'll let you guys go home.